Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Rafah Chahine. I am a third-year medical student. Today, inshallah, I'm going to be explaining the anatomy and the physiology of the ear. Physio includes hearing and balance. But just before we start, here's my contact information in case you have any questions, concerns, anything you want me to clarify. But also, before we begin, a few things I want to note. I don't have an objective slide because it's pretty straightforward. It's just anatomy and physio, that's it. And what else? So many of these slides are going to be very text heavy and very picture heavy. The reason that they are like that is because I honestly didn't want to miss anything. And in case I did miss saying anything, it would be on the side and I'd be able to refer to it, yada, yada. But also it's for your reference in case you are reading while you are watching this. So yeah, let's get started. So we're going to start off with the outer ear. Now, just to give you a little overview, we have the outer ear, which is this entire area. We have the area of the ear that we can see, and then we have this ear canal, and then in the inner ear we have the middle ear, we have the bones, the tympanic membrane, the eustachian tube. We're going to get into all of those details, and this is what we have in the inner ear. Now we're mainly going to be discussing this section, right? Now, in the outer ear, the visible area of the outer ear is what we like to call the pinna or the auricle. Those two terms are interchangeably used, right? So this entire thing is considered the pinna or the auricle, and the specific parts of it that we want to highlight are those that are underlined. So the helix, antihelix, concha, lobule, antitragus, tragus, external auditory meatus. So this is going to be the helix, antihelix. If you know piercing names, then you know these. Concha, this is a lobule. This is the antitragus, so this is a trachea. They're opposite to each other. And this is the external auditory meatus, which will lead us to the eardrum or the tympanic membrane, okay? So apart from it having structures that you need to know the names of, it also does a couple more things, which is, for example, it heightens our sensitivity to sound, meaning that it acts like a tent or a funnel. And essentially what that means is that it's going to funnel in the sound into your external auditory canal, but also it can boost the sound that you are hearing by about 15 to 16 decibels. If you don't know what decibels are, we're going to get into it as well. Like it's going to come up later on in the presentation. Now, the way that it boosts the sound by 15 to 16 decibels is by using the passive resonance effect. To break this down for you, passive meaning it doesn't use any energy. This just happens unconsciously. It's just an added function to the outer ear, okay? Resonance means that we're amplifying sound, and effect is the output. So to put this all together, passive is something that we don't know is happening, something that is just a function of the anatomy of the outer ear. Resonance is amplification of sound. Now, other things that it does is that it also maintains favorable temperature and humidity for the tympanic membrane or the eardrum, which we will get into. And it also helps with sound collection, amplification, directional sensitivity, and resonance in the ear canal. I think all of these are pretty self-explanatory. Anyways, moving on. So this is what the external auditory canal looks like. So we know what this section is. This is the auricle and the pinna. We know all the structures and what they're called. We know that it funnels in sound and it amplifies and heightens or boosts the sound by 15 to 16 decibels, etc., etc. Now, for the external auditory canal, which is this S-shaped tube, what you need to know is that the outer 1/3, okay, is cartilaginous, which means that, or to help you remember that, the outer 1/3, so this part of my ear I can move and bend because it's made of cartilage. So the immediate section of the external auditory canal right next to that is also going to be made of cartilage. So it's made of cartilage, and it's also lined by things like hair follicles, sebaceous, and ceruminous glands. Now, sebaceous glands, we know they're glands that produce oil. Ceruminous glands, they do produce oil to some extent, but that oil is the earwax that we love so much. Who doesn't love earwax? But the medial 2/3 of the external auditory canal are actually bony or osseous. So what this means is that around the medial 2/3, we have bones like the temporal part of the skull, the mastoid bone, etc., etc. So take away from this, outer 1/3, that's cartilage. Medial 2/3, that's thin bone overlying the osseous canal, easily traumatized, etc. So bone, okay? And yeah, the outer 1/3 contains the hair follicles, sebaceous, and the ceruminous glands. Now, clinical application of the external auditory canal is just infection and foreign bodies or blockage. This, the clinical application of most of what we are going to be taking in this PAL session will mainly be covered by Mohammed Al-Fouis, or should I say Dr. Mohammed Al-Fouis, because he's going to be having an HNS crash course, and a lot of the clinical things that you will take will be covered there. So I'm not really going to cover much of the clinical. It's only the basic anatomy and physio. But this is just very simple and short, so I might as well mention it. The external or outer ear is not very prone, but it is prone to infections, and that is called otitis externa. Same way how the middle ear is prone to otitis media, which is middle ear infection. And it can also get impacted with hardened earwax or cerumen, which we said comes from the ceruminous glands, and foreign bodies. So you know how sometimes kids can get an ear infection because they accidentally lodged something in their ear maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and they come back with an infection and you don't know why. You perform an otoscope and you're like, oh, hey, there's a Lego in your ear, kind of thing. So a common method of removing any impacted wax or foreign bodies is ear syringing. Now, we're done with the external ear. We said that this is for sound reception. It is what is going to collect the sound waves that are around me in my environment and take them into my middle and my inner ear, right? Now, next up is the middle ear, or the tympanic cavity, or sound used for sound transmission. This is the function. And we're going to understand what we mean by sound transmission in a bit. And then we have the inner ear. This is for sensory transduction, balance, and equilibrium. And again, we're also going to understand that in a bit. Okay? So that's it. Now, for the middle ear, this is the beginning, right? I want us to look at everything written on this in this slide. We have the auricle. This is the cartilage. This is the bone. Outer 1/3 is the cartilage. Inner 2/3 is the bone. Yes, or medial 2/3 is the bone. This is the external acoustic meatus. This is the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. After the eardrum or the tympanic membrane, we have the middle ear. In the middle ear, we have some very, very important structures. We're going to get into all the details, but just like a very small intro, we have 3 of the smallest bones in our body, which are the malleus, incus, and stapes, and we're going to talk more about them. Then we have this eustachian tube. This eustachian tube, or the pharyngotympanic tube or canal, is basically a tube that connects our middle ear to our pharynx, from the name, pharyngotympanic. Tympanic cavity. So the middle ear is also called the tympanic cavity. That's why it's called pharyngotympanic. And then after that, we have the inner ear, which contains the cochlea. And then we have the vestibular apparatus. What did I just say? Vestibular apparatus. That includes the utricles, the sacula, the semicircular canals, and we're going to get into all of that. And then we have the nerves. Yay. And this brown lining over here is the coating of the cerumen. And we're going to talk about what the oval window and the round window are later on. So yeah. Now we're going to talk about the tympanic membrane and the cavity, meaning the eardrum and the middle ear cavity. Okay. So now we're starting off with the tympanic membrane. Honestly, the tympanic membrane is actually pretty important because it can tell you a lot about when there is a problem in the ear. Now, what the tympanic membrane is that it is a very thin, semi-transparent oval membrane that is attached to the tympanic annulus. Pause. This circle is a tympanic annulus. When we say something is annular in structure, we're talking about it being circular. So when we say, okay, it's attached to the tympanic annulus, it's attached to the area of the tympanic cavity that is circular, made for the eardrum, right? That's literally it. It is thin, semi-transparent oval membrane, and it basically attaches to the tympanic membrane at a 55-degree angle. You can see, I tried to illustrate it over here for you. This is the 55-degree angle. And the way that it appears on an otoscope, which is the ear examination, is that it should be pearly gray, shiny, and it should be concave. So outwards, okay? And it should be tightly stretched and glistening with visible landmarks. Those landmarks is this structure that we see over here, and we're going to highlight what they are in a bit. And the tympanic membrane and the clinical application, again, will be covered in the crash course, but the tympanic membrane is actually very susceptible to things like perforation and trauma, and it can be impacted by infection, etc. What is important about the tympanic membrane is not just everything else that I mentioned, but specifically the nerve supply. It is supplied by 3 main nerves or branches of nerves, okay? Firstly, we have the auriculotemporal branch, or V3 auriculotemporal branch. The reason that we're saying V3 is because I'm pretty sure you've taken the trigeminal nerve by now, and you know that the trigeminal nerve has 3 divisions. Now we're talking about V3, or the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve, that will give us the auriculotemporal branch. First nerve supply of the tympanic membrane. The second nerve supply is from the glossopharyngeal nerve. We have the tympanic branch. Glossopharyngeal nerve, also known as Jacobson's nerve, that will form the tympanic plexus, and that tympanic plexus is coming from the tympanic branch of that nerve. The tympanic plexus, which is something that you need to know, is that it is on the medial side. So it is not on the surface of the tympanic membrane. No, it is towards the bony side where we have the small bones in our, the smallest bones. That's where the tympanic plexus is. And then lastly, we have the vagus or cranial nerve number 10. That will give us, that will give us the auricular branch of the vagus. And that is also known as Alderman's nerve. Now, just to recap, we have three nerve supplies to the tympanic membrane. We have the auriculotemporal branch, which is coming from V3 of the trigeminal or the mandibular division of the trigeminal. Then we have the tympanic branch from the glossopharyngeal nerve or cranial nerve number 9, which will form the tympanic plexus on the medial side of the tympanic cavity or the tympanic membrane, And lastly, we have the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, which is also known as Alderman's branch. Vagus is cranial nerve number 10. Okay, so now this is the tympanic membrane. Actually, I want to explain it here, then we'll go to the actual otoscope picture. So this is what the tympanic membrane looks like if I were to perform an otoscope on any patient, right? Firstly, a few things that I want us to appreciate are the different sections of the tympanic membrane. On top, over here, we have pars flaccida. Then we have pars tensa. From the name, flaccida is going to be a little bit flaccid. It's going to be a little bit slack, so it's kind of flexible. The membrane can move. Meanwhile, pars tensa is very tightly stretched. Yes. Now, a few other things that I want you to appreciate are this structure over here. Okay, this is the malleus. Remember how I said the first bone of the middle ear is the malleus? So this impression of the malleus on the tympanic membrane will allow us to appreciate the fact that, hey, the tympanic membrane is actually healthy. If we can see this landmark, then it's healthy, okay? So in the malleus, what I want to appreciate is this section, which is the umbo, and this, which is the handle of the malleus, and this is the lateral process of the malleus. And we're going to see all of this on the otoscope. And then this is the cone of light. Now, the cone of light, I knew, the otoscope, the tool itself, it has lights in it, right? I just thought, okay, it just makes it easier for the people to see, for the doctor and the physician to see. But actually, it's not just for them to be able to see more clearly. It shows them the integrity of the tympanic membrane, meaning that if the cone of light is now present, okay, if you can't see a cone of light like this, which is this cone of light, okay, if you can't see that, then there's something wrong with the tympanic membrane. More likely, there's something wrong with it, okay? And then a few other things are the vascular and the nerve supply coming from above meaning from the sides of the middle ear. Then we have the course of chordae tympani nerve. Chordae tympani is the nerve coming from facial nerve, and we're going to see and appreciate it again later on. And this is the anterior malleolar fold. This is the posterior malleolar fold. These are just the things that you need to memorize. This pink line over here, this is incision for meningotomy. This is usually where they make an incision to drain any pus or insert a tympanostomy tube. So let's appreciate this on the actual otoscope. On the actual otoscope, we have, this is the tympanic membrane. Yes, this is the tympanic annulus. Okay. Now, this is the umbo of the malleus, and this is the handle of the malleus, and this is the lateral process of the malleus. Okay. This entire section is the pars tensa, and this AT stands for attic, which is where the pars flaccida is at, okay? The LPI, this is the long process of the incus. Honestly, even if you paid me $1 million, I wouldn't be able to tell you that I can see the lateral process of the incus, but it is supposed to be there, okay? If you're a professional ENT doctor, you're gonna see it, but me personally, I can't, okay? But yeah, I hope the otoscope is clear. This is just a few more pictures. So again, we have this entire section. This is the pars tensa. On top over here, we have the pars flaccida, or in the real otoscope, they mentioned it as attic or AT. Then we have the umbo of the malleus, the handle of the malleus, the lateral process of the malleus over here. They illustrated the chordae tympani nerve for you, and we said that that is from cranial nerve number 7. This is where we do the incision for the meningotomy, which we said is for draining pus and any fluids, or to insert a tympanostomy. And yeah, one other thing that we need to note is this very important cone of light, or the light reflex. You need to make sure that you can appreciate this light reflex. It is very important. And the malleolar folds, we said that we have we said that we have the anterior malleolar fold over here, and then the posterior one over here. I don't think they're going to ask you to actually differentiate between malleolar fold, but yeah, so it's malleolar fold. So this is just another picture, the cone of light, they're just highlighting that, and these landmarks are going to be visible in a healthy tympanic membrane. So, clinical application, this slide looks like a lot, but honestly, I just summarized it into this. Clinical application, again, will be covered in the crash course, but this is just very simple and very quick to mention. We can have a large perforation of the pars tensa. We can have a small perforation of the pars tensa, and we can have a perforation of the pars flaccida. This is where the clinical application occurs in the tympanic membrane. Usually it's ruptures and perforations. So yeah, you can have the large perforation of the pars tensa, small perforation of the pars tensa, and perforation of the pars flaccida. This can occur due to trauma, infections, surgery, maybe a problem with a tympanostomy. It could also be due to barotrauma. Barotrauma meaning, like for example, you can read about it online. There are stories of divers losing their ability to hear because they went in too deep. And obviously we know not where to not go now, and we know that our ears are not able to handle deep pressures like that underwater. But some of the divers, some divers, they just had their tympanic membranes essentially ruptured because they weren't aware of the consequences of this kind of stuff, and most of it is just accidents. But yeah, and that's why spacecrafts have this whole pressure equalizing mechanism or whatever. But yeah, and the perforations that occur in the tympanic membrane usually will spontaneously close in about 2 months. But in case a perforation does occur to anyone, you can give prophylactic antibiotics to avoid any secondary infections. Okay, now we get this slide. Now, when this slide, what's it called? When I first saw this slide and when it was first explained to me, I basically clocked out. I didn't understand a single thing. Bess, I'm gonna try my best to explain it to you in the simplest way possible. I was gonna draw a whole diagram on my own, but I realized, you know, I might as well not because I'm too scared of confusing you even more. Okay, but a few things that we need to know is that this is the whole entire middle ear cavity. The only thing that they removed are the bones. Okay, the only thing of any that is of importance to us are the bones. Yes, play. Imagine that we have. Let me actually bring out this pen. Okay, imagine that we have the external auditory meatus continuing. External auditory canal continuing like this. Yes, so this is our way to the outside world. So logically speaking, this wall that we see over here, this is going to be the tympanic membrane, yes? Now, where is it? Yeah, so that is going to be the tympanic membrane, or the tympanic wall, essentially, yeah? And that is going to lead us to the, okay, wait, pause. Yeah, so that is going to be the tympanic wall, okay? Now, we know the tympanic wall. If you know anything about the middle ear, I know we haven't taken its full-on anatomy, but this is just to brief you on how things are going, right? On the opposite side, obviously, we're going to be leading ourselves into the inner ear, yes? And that is where we get the medial or the labyrinthine wall. The reason it's called the labyrinthine wall is because the structures in the middle ear are basically referred to as bony labyrinths, okay? That's why it's called the labyrinthine wall. So imagine, over here, we're supposed to have the cochlea like this, and we're supposed to have the semicircular canals like that. So this is why this is called the labyrinthine wall, this hot pink wall, okay? And then we go to the posterior or the mastoid wall, which then brings me to this slide where I'm actually going to draw it out for you, because honestly, I didn't get it at all when I tried to explain it to myself in second year. But I finally ended up figuring it out enough to be able to explain it to you. Duh. So let's just redraw it. This is the external auditory canal, okay? Like, this means that we have the tympanic membrane right here. Then we have the middle ear, okay? In the middle ear, what are we going to have? We're going to have the malleus, which is the first one of the bones. Then we have the incus, okay? And lastly, we have the stapes, okay? And we're going to keep on mentioning these in the middle ear section, but this is just, for now, supposed to be enough. After the middle ear, we're going to have the inner ear, okay? In the inner ear, we're going to have the cochlea, and then the semicircular canals, okay? That's about it for the general structure. Now, let's just say, okay, I want to show you what I mean by posterior or mastoid wall, okay? Remember how I said that obviously areas of the skull are going to be lining most of this entire structure of the ear, yes? So we're gonna have parts of the temporal bone, etc., etc. And we know that the mastoid is a part of the temporal bone as well, right? Now, imagine, or okay, here's the way that I thought about it when I was in second year. I thought that the mastoid bone is actually sitting right on top of the middle ear cavity, but that is not the case, okay? Because if I were to draw it out for you, okay, let's just say that this is the mastoid, okay, over here, this is the mastoid. By then we have the middle ear cavity over here. This is the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity. This is where the mastoid is. When I didn't understand the anatomy properly, I sincerely thought that the mastoid was sitting right over here, okay? So if I wanted to draw the mastoid in this diagram and show you where it lies in relative to the middle ear cavity, it would be in the opposite side, okay? Now, the reason that this is called the posterior or the mastoid wall is not only because, okay, the mastoid bone is over there, whatever, but it also has, I mean, it also leads us to the mastoid air cells, which I'm pretty sure you guys know and you've taken, and we understand what the mastoid air cells are. So I hope this helps understand why this section or this posterior wall of the middle ear cavity is called the mastoid wall. And the reason that it's posterior as well is something that I honestly forgot to explain, is that we can imagine that the face is this way. And I have my eyes over here, okay? Well, I have my nose over here, essentially, okay? So the face is this way. Yani, let's just say that this is my right ear, okay? I'm looking at my right ear. So this is why that this is going to be the posterior or mastoid, okay? Now, let's go back to the this section over here, and let's erase everything that I drew, because what the hell? Okay. So we're done with this wall over here. We know that this is the tympanic wall, okay? We're done with the medial and the labyrinthine wall because we know that it's facing the inner ear. This is done. And now we understand how the posterior wall, which is the one that I will not color because it's a bunch of other walls overlying it, this square, we know that this is the posterior or the mastoid wall, okay? Now, the anterior, which is this one, the one that we have left, or it's not the only one left, but this one, okay, from the four sides of the cube, the anterior wall is going to be called the carotid wall. Now, to understand this, I want you to appreciate the internal jugular vein before we continue. And next to the internal jugular vein, we're going to have the internal carotid wall over here, okay? Now, if I want to go back to my illustration, I wouldn't even call this or categorize this as an illustration, but let's just say, call it an illustration, okay? Let's just say, and no, I want to draw my internal carotid artery. My internal carotid artery would start under, okay, under there, okay? But it would eventually come and circle around to the anterior wall, okay? And we can see this happening over here. So technically speaking, let me also erase what I did. Okay, so technically speaking, if we want to continue this drawing of the internal carotid, it would literally go like this, okay? It's gonna be next to the internal jugular vein, and it's going to continue like this, bend from the bottom and go back to the top and stick to the anterior wall of the middle ear. Hence why this front wall is going to be called the internal carotid wall, okay? So, the carotid wall. Okay. Now we want to, okay, so we're done with the tympanic, okay? And, okay, we're done with the anterior carotid wall. What we have left is the floor of the jugular and the roof of the tegmen tympani, and the tensor tympani muscle, which we'll get to. Okay, so first of all, roof or tegmen tympani. What does that even mean? Play. This is the roof, okay, and this is tegmen tympani. Tegmen tympani, okay, it's a thin bony plate that is a part of the temporal bone that basically just covers the top of the middle ear cavity. That's literally it. So this is where we have a bone from the temporal cavity. That's it. That's all you need to know. It's called, this thin bony plate is called tegmen tympani or tympani. However, which way you want to say it. So we're done with the tegmen tympani, and obviously I'm going to review this if you guys want me to. So this is, we're done with the tegmen tympani. Now we're moving on to the floor or the jugular wall. Now the reason that it's called the jugular wall or the floor is because first of all, it is the floor of the middle ear cavity. But the reason that it's called the jugular wall is because we have the jugular vein over here, okay? Now what happens is that the jugular vein, let me actually bring blue back. Okay. Okay. So what happens to the internal jugular vein is that, okay, it's going to be at the bottom of the middle ear cavity, but then it's actually going to come and overline or come right under the wall. So it's going to bend like this. So let's just say that this is my floor of the middle ear cavity. This is the internal jugular. It's going to bend like that. Hence why it's going to make the floor of the floor of the middle ear cavity or the jugular wall. Okay. Now, a few other things that they mentioned is the tensor tympani muscle. Now, this is the tensor tympani muscle, and we're going to take it in more detail anyway. We're going to understand where it attaches and all that kind of stuff in a bit. But this is the tensor tympani muscle. Another muscle that I don't think they mentioned here is the stapedius, and we're also going to see that. And a few other things that I would like to mention are the oval window and the round window. Now, the oval window, always keep in mind that the oval window is going to be above the round window, okay? The oval window is the almost direct connection between the middle ear cavity and the inner ear cavity, okay? Okay, and this is the facial or the cranial nerve, okay? Cranial nerve number 7, sorry. Now, we're going to understand how this happens, okay? And how this bend is taking place, okay? Okay, and, okay, sorry, I don't know why I'm tweaking, playing. So let's just say that this green color is going to be the cranial nerve number 7, okay? So what's going to happen is that cranial nerve number 7, okay? Okay, so it's going to come from the pontomedullary junction. Imagine we have the pons over here, medulla over here. It's going to come from the junction EA. We already know this, right? So it's going to come from the pontomedullary junction, okay? And what is it? Okay, okay. So it's going to come from the pontomedullary junction. And then it's going to go, but then we know that the anatomy of the cranial nerve number 7 is a little bit complicated because it forms this genu, it goes through the internal acoustic meatus, and it comes out of this and that and that. Now, this lecture is not about cranial nerve number 7, but I do want you to understand where the genu stands in terms of the middle ear cavity, okay? So, you see how this is the facial nerve, yes? It's going to go up and then it's going to go behind. So now it's at the posterior or the mastoid wall, yes? It's going to come and bend. This is the genu, okay? Where does the genu happen? The genu happens around the geniculate body. From your cranial nerve 7, the genu occurs at the geniculate body, yes? So we can assume, okay, according to this diagram that I drew out, that it's going to come from the posterior, okay? And it's going to come and form the genu at this corner over here. Now, if you don't know, genu in Latin essentially means, wait, let me check something. My bad. Sorry, the genu is going to occur actually at this area. I'm sorry. So the genu is going to occur, and okay, so the reason that I'm tweaking. Okay, wait, let's restart. Okay. Okay. So we have the middle ear cavity. I'm not going to draw the bones. This is the external auditory canal, and this is the inner ear. Okay. Now, if I want to draw or explain to you where the cranial nerve 7 comes from, okay. Firstly, I want you to understand in the cranial nerve 7, it comes from the pontomedullary junction. Okay, it goes through the internal acoustic meatus, and then it forms a genu at the geniculate body. Now, to understand this in terms of the middle ear, just know that this corner is important, okay? That's the way I remembered it in second year, that one of the posterior corners of the middle ear cavity is going to form the genu, okay? Now, the way that this is going to happen is that, let's just say it comes from the pontomedullary junction over here, okay? It's going to go up, whatever. We go through the internal acoustic meatus, and then it's going to go from below, okay? Then it's going to come up, and then it's going to bend over the middle ear cavity. That's how it forms a genu over here. Genu in Latin means sharp push or knee, okay? So, to show this again, let's just erase everything that we did over here as well. Okay. To show this again, let's just imagine, and the cranial, this is where the pontomedullary junction is. The cranial nerve came out of here. Now we already entered the internal acoustic meatus, whatever. Now we want to form the genu, okay? So it's going to go from below. It's going to go to the posterior wall, which we know is the mastoid wall over here. From the mastoid wall, it's going to come above. And then at the corner of the middle ear cavity, it's going to form this genu over here, and then it's going to bend forward. Now about the cranial nerve number 7 is that it will also give us the lingual nerve and the chordae tympani, because the chordae tympani is a branch of the cranial nerve number 7, right? So these branches are going to come and they're going to enter actually the middle ear cavity. And if you remember from the this picture, the otoscope, this yellow line over here is the chorda tympani. So you can kind of appreciate how things are looking and how things are oriented in terms of the cranial nerve number 7 and the walls, etc. So because I fumbled, I'm gonna review. I'm gonna try my best to make it as clear as possible, so we can move on to the next slides. Okay, so let's start one by one. First of all, we have the lateral or the tympanic membranous wall. Now, this is formed by the tympanic membrane. If this is the external auditory canal from this point onwards, then obviously this section is going to be the tympanic membrane, okay? Meaning that this is going to be the tympanic wall. Nice? Now, let's go to the roof or the tegment of the tegmen tympani. We said that the tegmen tympani is a thin bony plate coming from the temporal bone that goes above the middle ear cavity. So it is exactly the roof of the middle ear cavity, okay? So this is the tegmen tympani, okay? Nice. And I'm going to continue reading so I don't overwhelm myself with lines and all of that. Okay, then we're going to move to the floor. I don't know if I explained it properly, but what I meant to say about the internal jugular vein is that it will obviously follow alongside the internal carotid artery, by the way, but the internal jugular vein is going to come, okay, it's going to ascend towards the middle ear cavity, and then under the middle ear cavity, literally right under it, it's gonna bend, and it's going to basically sleep under the floor, okay? So it's going to come in this direction. It's going to come towards you, yes? So that's how it forms this floor over here, okay? Nice. Now for the posterior or the mastoid wall, as I previously explained, let me just erase this purple stuff. Okay. The mastoid or the posterior wall is called the mastoid wall because actually the mastoid part or the mastoid section of the temporal bone lies behind the middle ear cavity. Because if we want to look at it from, for example, my right side, if I put a camera up to my right side, here's what it's going to look like, okay? This is my middle ear cavity. This is my skull. This is my temporal, this is a part of my temporal bone. And this is going to be my mastoid process, yes? That is why it is posterior. So this is the anterior wall. Okay, and so this is going to be my posterior wall, hence the mastoid wall. And let's just write mastoid over here, okay? Nice. So the mastoid wall is this wall that is going on in the back. Okay, now, tensor tympani muscle, we said that we're going to mention it in more detail later on. For the anterior or the carotid wall, let's switch threads because it's an artery. Okay, so for the anterior or the internal carotid or the carotid wall, basically the internal or the carotid will usually accompany the internal jugular vein. It will go below, okay, and then it will come back up. And it will come back up and it will lie over the anterior wall of the middle ear cavity or the front of it, which is this section over here. Okay. Now for the medial or the labyrinthine wall, the easiest wall to understand, since this area is a tympanic membrane and it's facing the external auditory canal, then obviously this area is going to be facing the inner ear. Hence why it is called the medial or the labyrinthine wall. Labyrinthine because I mentioned that the structures inside the inner ear are referred to as bony labyrinths. Bony labyrinth, okay? Like. A couple of other things that I did just mention are going to be the oval window and the round window, which I said are connections, whether it be open or closed connections from the middle ear to the inner ear, and we're going to visualize those much better later on. And then we have the chorda tympani, which this is the chorda tympani, and this is the lingual nerve, which will give us the chorda tympani. They are both branches of the facial nerve. Now, for the facial nerve, which we said is cranial nerve number 7, it will come, for example, from the pontomedullary junction, which we can assume is this box over here. It will come to the pontomedullary junction, and then we know how it forms a genu, and before the genu, it enters into the internal acoustic meatus, which is this point over here, hence why I put this picture. This is the genu, and this occurs at the geniculate body, and then it's going to go up, okay? And then it's going to go under, and then it's going to go to the posterior wall, which we said is the mastoid wall, and then it's going to come back up, and at the corner of the middle ear cavity, at the posterior corner of the middle ear cavity, is going to form the genu. Okay, and that will give us the rest of the cranial nerve number 7. For this, by the way, for this illustration, credits to Shahid Hamad from my batch. She illustrated it for Palbites, and yeah. So, this is a better illustration of the facial nerve. I should have just showed this before I started tweaking, but the facial nerve, okay, comes up And as I said, from the posterior corner of the middle ear cavity, it's going to come and it's going to form this gene over here. And then it's going to go forward, whatever, it's going to form the geniculate ganglion, etc., etc. And this is the same thing over here. It's just in a different orientation and a different view. And if you remember, we said Jacobson's nerve, that's the glossopharyngeal, right? And the chorda tympani, we said it's a branch of the cranial nerve number 7. Okay. And you can see that the jugular and the carotid artery kind of run alongside each other. And you can see how the jugular bends over. And this is the floor of the middle ear cavity, right? So it bends on the floor. It sleeps under the floor to form the floor of the middle ear cavity. And the carotid artery, this is the anterior wall, okay? The carotid artery goes in front of it. So this is also going to be called the carotid wall, okay? And in case you don't understand the orientation of this picture, I can continue its drawing. This is the mandible. So you can assume that we have teeth over here. This is the chin, okay? And this should kind of like help you understand how this is oriented. So the face is in this direction, okay? We have the eyes over here. So yeah. Oh, and this is the mastoid antrum, okay? So this is the mastoid process of the temporal bone, but the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity, which is this one, is facing the mastoid antrum, or where the mastoid air cells are located. I hope that makes sense. If we reach a certain part in this PowerPoint and I feel like we need to revise it or anything like that, we can do that. But yeah, okay. And I'm going to try and make a proper diagram and illustration of what literally everything that I explained. I'm going to put it on the slide so you guys can see it after it is uploaded on the PAL Programs OneDrive. Okay, so we're back to the same thing. Now we're only adding on to this, okay? Specifically, what we're adding is this, the promontory, or however, which way you want to say it, honestly. Now, what the promontory is it is the impression that the cochlea, which we said is a structure in the inner ear, it is the impression that the cochlea produces on the labyrinthine wall. So we know that this is the labyrinthine wall. We know why it's called the labyrinthine wall. But we also need to understand that the cochlea is pushing onto it, okay? Let me use a different color because it's kind of blending in. Let's not use purple. Okay, let's use the color. So I'm going to draw it out for you, and I'm going to, and hopefully that will make it easier for you to understand what the promontory is, okay? So let me draw the cochlea, okay? This is essentially what the cochlea is going to look like, okay? Now, this is what the cochlea looks like. Promontory, in case you don't know what that means, it is essentially, usually it is used in terms of like a body of water and a rock sticking out of it, okay? In our case, we're talking about a bite being taken out by the basilar turn of the cochlea. So this specific part of the cochlea is called the basilar turn, okay? This is the basilar turn, okay? And this is basilar turn of the cochlea will basically form an impression on the medial or the labyrinthine wall, forming this promontory. But now, the reason that this is relevant to us is because the promontory allows us to visualize or understand the nerve supply of the middle ear cavity. So we know, or we previously mentioned, if you remember, that the tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve, or Jacobson's nerve, which is cranial nerve number 9, forms a tympanic plexus on the medial side of the tympanic membrane, yes? So let's just say I take out this anterior wall. Ignore the anterior wall. We're just looking inside the middle ear cavity. What we're going to see is just nerves innervating the inner middle ear cavity, the mucous membranes of this inner ear cavity. And lying on the promontory area specifically, we have branches from the tympanic plexus and all that. So all in all, tympanic plexus supplies the mucous membranes of the middle ear cavity. The cochlea, the basilar turn of the cochlea, forms this promontory that we love, and that occurs on the medial or the labyrinthine wall. We already explained the external genio of the facial nerve. You can let me know later on if you want me to re-explain it. And yeah, okay. Now we're starting off in the middle ear. Honestly, the middle ear is my favorite. But yeah. So in the middle ear, we want to appreciate a couple of things here so we can understand what's specific anatomy we want to look at, okay? So, okay, haba haba. Now we have the malleus. Malleus is the first bone that we want to look at, okay? we have the malleus that is attached to the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane, okay? This section over here, this is the tympanic membrane. And remember how we said in Ohei, the malleus has impressions on the tympanic membrane. We can see its umbo, its handle, its lateral process, etc., etc. This is just a better way to visualize how the malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane, okay? So the malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane. Attached to the malleus, we have the incus. Attached to the incus, we have the stapes, okay? This is the stapes over here. Now, a few other things that I want you to appreciate is here it says stapes over the oval window. That is why you can't see the oval window. But if you were to be able to see it, you should appreciate that it is above the round window. And this is the round window that we can see over here. Okay. And also in the middle ear, we mentioned the opening to the eustachian tube. And I mentioned that this is the pharyngotympanic tube, which basically connects the pharynx to the tympanic cavity or the middle ear. Okay. And this is the tympanic annulus, which is the circular structure that that attaches the tympanic membrane to it. And yeah, then we have the tympanic plexus. As you can see, this is coming from Jacobson's nerve or the glossopharyngeal nerve or cranial nerve number 9. And yeah, now, so the components of the middle ear, we have the, okay, so it basically lies between the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, and the cochlea or the inner ear. Now, it also contains ossicles. The ossicles are basically the bones that we've been mentioning so many times, the malleus, incus, and the stapes. It also has the oval window and the round window, and it has the opening to the eustachian tube, and it also contains 2 muscles, okay, which are pretty important to us. Now, the middle ear, 3 of the sponus bones, these are called the ossicles, okay? This is just 2 different ways that you can visualize them, just 2 different directions. These ossicles, we have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, okay? Malleus, also known as, also all of them are named after, or you can name them as tools because they look like the tools, okay? Okay, so the malleus is also known as a hammer because it looks like a hammer, and that is the one that is attached to the tympanic membrane, and that is the one that we visualize the impressions for, yes? The umbo, the handle, and the lateral process. Attached to the malleus, we have the incus or the anvil, okay? This is what it looks like. This is what their attachment looks like from the, if we're looking from the inner direction of the inner ear, this is what the attachment looks like. And then we have the stapes or the stirrup. Now the stapes and the stirrup, honestly, it's like it might be the smallest one, but it's the most important one. And it attaches to the oval window, which we mentioned over here. We said that, no, hey, the stapes is over the oval window. We're going to see how the oval window has anything to do with anything. But the stapes attaches to the oval window that will lead to the inner ear. And that is the big, the major step of sound transduction, okay? Which is really interesting. And we're going to see how that works in a bit. So the advantage of these ossicles in the middle ear is that they are very sensitive to soft sounds. Yani even some people can hear the smallest things ever, and anyone can do that, but you know, some people can, and that is because their ossicles are more sensitive, right? And then the disadvantage is that these can be very easily damaged, and that can obviously cause hearing loss, okay? That can be damaged either by trauma, barotrauma, and loud sounds. But yeah. So now we have the muscles of the inner ear. I've been mentioning tensor tympani, and I mentioned stapedius once, I think. Now we're going to actually look into how they are, okay? So you can see the malleus. This is from imagine I'm in the inner ear and I'm looking at the screen right now, or you're in the inner ear and you're looking at the screen right now. This is the direction or the orientation that we're at, okay? So from the inside, this is what it looks like, malleus, incus, stapes. Now, from the name, stapedius muscle, or actually, let's start with tensor tympani. I don't know why I'm not going in order. Okay. Tensor tympani is a pretty long muscle, okay, that will insert itself on the malleus. You're probably wondering, hey, what does it do? At that point, I will tell you, look at the name. It says tensor tympani. It tenses the tympanic membrane, okay? So it attaches to the malleus, and in order to be able to tense the tympanic membrane, it will basically contract. And when it contracts, it does not allow the malleus to move as much, right? Or the, no, not the malleus, sorry. It will contract and it will pull the malleus with it, meaning that the malleus is now pulling the tympanic membrane, okay? So if the tympanic membrane is more stretched or contracted than what it usually is, obviously the sound waves are not going to hit the membrane hard enough, okay? And it's not going to vibrate as hard as it used to, right? So that's how the tensor tympani acts, okay? So again, the tensor tympani, it attaches to the malleus. Now, when the tensor tympani contracts, it usually contracts as a reflex to loud sounds, by the way. When it contracts, it will pull the malleus. The malleus will pull on the tympanic membrane, and that will allow for less vibrations to come from it, okay? And the tensor tympani is innervated by the mandibular nerve from the trigeminal, so the third division of the trigeminal, okay? Now for the stapedius, from the name, it is attached to the stapes muscle. Now, it connects to the stapes, and when it contracts, it will reduce the action of the stapes on the oval window, okay? So, in order to understand how this works, we need to know that, okay, to begin sound transduction, the sound waves are going to hit the eardrum, yes? Once they hit the eardrum, it's going to start vibrating. When it vibrates, it's going to vibrate the malleus will vibrate the incus, and then that will vibrate the stapes. The stapes will hit on the oval window. In case you don't know what the oval window is, an oval window is a direct connection from the middle ear cavity to the inner ear. The main function of the stapes bone, and the reason why I said it's the smallest but probably the most important, is because that is the one that will conduct the sound waves from the external environment to the inner environment, yes? And it does that by relaying those vibrations by hitting on the oval window, which will then transmit those sound waves into the inner ear, okay? So with that very basic baseline understanding, you can now picture how when the stapedius muscle contracts, the stapes can no longer hit on the oval window the way it used to, right? So we're no longer able to transmit the sound waves from the external area, which is the external, the outer ear and the middle ear, into the inner ear, okay? And most of the time it contracts before speaking and chewing, and that is because if we didn't have the stapedius muscle, okay, what would happen is you would be able to hear yourself eat more than you would usually do. And I know sometimes when we chew, we can hear ourselves chewing, right? But it reduces that, the stapes, the function of it reduces that sound by so many levels. In case we didn't have it, then we would be able to hear ourselves chew, and we would be able to hear a bunch of vibrations as we speak. But yeah, now the stapedius is innervated by a branch of the facial nerve, okay? So we said that the tensor tympani is attached to the malleus, okay? It tenses the tympanic membrane to reduce any vibrations, and it is innervated by the mandibular division of cranial nerve number 5, yeah? Yeah, sorry, I forgot to go back to the slide. But then we have the stapedius, which is attached to the stapes, and when it contracts, it stops the stapes from hitting on the oval window. When it does that, it reduces the amplification of sound, or the transduction of sound from the inner and the middle ear to the outer ear and the middle ear to the inner ear. And it is innervated by a branch of the facial nerve or cranial nerve number 7. Okay, I hope that the muscles of the middle ear are clear. Okay, so now this is where we get a little bit of physio for the middle ear. And I really like this physio, so hopefully it'll be good, okay? So when we put all the bones together, we call them the ossicular chain, okay? And from the logic of how the ear works and how sound waves work, we can conclude that they vibrate as sound waves hit the tympanic membrane, yes? And I've said this multiple times. Now, how do I make sure, or how do we implement protective mechanisms by the ossicular chain that will protect our ear or amplify sounds? And that is what we're going to basically understand today. So the middle ear or the ossicular chain, it can do two things. It can do the attenuation reflex and the impedance matching. Now, what the attenuation reflex is, from the name, we're trying to attenuate the sound. We're trying to make it quieter, yes? And impedance matching, I'm gonna explain it when we get to the slide, because it's gonna be a little bit more physics, physics oriented. Okay, so for the attenuation reflex, this all has to do with the tensor tympani and the stapedius, okay? And the reason that I re-explain their functions twice is because of this attenuation reflex. So let's just say I'm at a concert and it's super loud, and my ears need to find a way to kind of decrease that sound, to decrease the amount of harm that it might cause me. It's going to do that through the attenuation reflex. And to initiate the attenuation reflex, the tensor tympani, which is attached to the malleus, we said, will contract, okay? That will cause the tympanic membrane to become taut, okay? Taut meaning it's going to be super stretched, okay? So that means that, imagine if I get a rubber band, okay? And I stretch it completely. Will it be able to be elastic the way it was when it wasn't stretched at all? Obviously not. Same logic applies to the tympanic membrane, yes? So yeah, it's going to become taut, and that will reduce the amplitude or the force of the eardrum on the malleus, okay, or the tympanic membrane on the malleus. The second thing that happens is that the contraction of the stapedius muscle will draw the stapes more outward, and that will reduce the impact on the organ of corti or the oval window. Okay, they're not the same thing. Organ of corti and oval window are not the same thing, but I should have changed this for oval window because I want to introduce this thing later, but organ of corti, okay? And we're gonna get into what the organ of corti is later on. But for now, just know the stapedius muscle will contract and it will draw the stapes away from the oval window, which will stop it from hitting it more, okay? So when we have a very loud sound that is transmitted through the ossicular system, these muscles are going to start to contract and as a reflex, as a protective reflex, and that will attenuate the sound and lower it, okay? Now, these two opposing forces can make the ossicular system very rigid, so its intensity is attenuated by 30 to 40 decibels. Decibels basically refers to the loudness of the sound, right? And so when we perform this attenuation reflex and contract these muscles, we are reducing the loudness of the sound by 30 to 40 decibels. Now, for impedance matching, it is different. It is not the same at all. We're trying to do something that we took in high school, okay? Remember how in high school we said that it is much easier for sound waves to pass through air than it is to pass through fluid? That is because the resistance in fluid is much towards sound waves is much higher. What? The resistance to sound waves in the medium of fluid is much higher than it is in air. So basically, what I'm trying to explain to you is the sound waves passing through the outer and the middle ear are okay. They're fine. But in the inner ear, the structures that are mainly responsible for hearing are filled with fluid. So whenever I transmit sound waves to those areas, they will not be of the same force or of the same amplitude. So in order to mitigate that, the ossicles in my middle ear have done something called impedance matching, where what they do is that they're going to basically make the acoustic force that comes from the malleus incus and the stapes much higher, okay, in order to maintain the energy and the force levels coming from the sound waves in the air towards the fluid. Because imagine I have my phone at full volume right next to my ear. I will hear it at maybe less than half the volume if I didn't have impedance matching. Why? Because yes, the sound waves are going to pass with so much force throughout my outer and my middle ear, but when they reach my inner ear, because it is full of fluid, there's too much resistance for them, right? So we're going to do impedance matching. Now, two main mechanisms to help us do impedance matching, okay? That is that the ossicles will act as a lever system and they're going to increase the force by 1.3 times. That is a fact, memorize it, okay? Then the surface area difference. This kind of should take you back to high school physics, how pressure equals force over area or whatever. So what this means is that the amount of pressure in a certain area relates to the amount of force that you apply to that area. You get it? So basically, okay, what I'm trying to say is, if I were to grab a piece of paper, okay, I ask someone to hold it for me and I apply pressure onto it, will that pressure equal to the amount of pressure that I add onto this tip of the pen? No, because the surface area of the tip of this pen is smaller than the surface area of the paper that I'm pushing on. Even if I am pushing with the same force, the pressure on the pen will be way more because the surface area is smaller. If I want to apply this to the ear, I will tell you that if the pressure that I'm applying on the tympanic membrane, the pressure that I'm applying on the tympanic membrane is going to be much lower than the pressure that I'm applying on the oval window. Why? Because the space for each of them is much different. The tympanic membrane is like 5 times bigger than the oval window. So it's the same thing as the paper and the tip of the pen concept. So again, if I take the tympanic membrane, okay, and it's as big as a tray that you put tea on, okay, and I start pushing on it, the pressure is going to be, in comparison to pushing on the oval window, the pressure is going to be much lower in the tympanic membrane than it will be on the oval window. And so we need to kind of equalize that. And we do that, okay, by basically working on the surface area difference. There's a whole equation to it that I planned on explaining, but then I realized, no, it's not a part of your curriculum. They didn't explain the equation to you at all. So I will tell you this piece of information and you need to just memorize it, okay? You don't need to go into the nitty-gritty as to how they got 22, whatever, whatever. If you want to, you can go ahead, but just don't do it, okay? So we said the two mechanisms. Number one is that we increase the force by 1.3 times with through the oscicular chain or the oh my god, why am I tweaking? Oscicular chain, or because of the surface area difference, which eventually means that there will be a 22-time increase in the force being applied on the fluid. Why? Because the oval window is much smaller than the tympanic membrane. So naturally, any force being applied to it is going to increase, it's going to be more in pressure. Yeah. So this is what it looks like in the middle ear, okay, if we remove the tympanic membrane, okay, or if we partially remove it, because we can see it over here, but it's open over here, okay. So obviously this is the malleus, okay. This is the stapes. Well, this is the stapedial tendon or the stapedial tendon, and this is the head of the stapes, okay. And this is just a tendon that attaches the stapes to the middle ear, just to make it more stable. Now we can't see the oval window because obviously the stapes is covering it, but we can see the round window over here. And this is the facial nerve. And okay, this is really not interesting, but it's fun because we can finally visualize it. Just to lastly make up for my fumble previously, the facial nerve, again, we said, it will come, let's just say it comes from below, whatever, it will come up here, form a geno, and then it will bend, okay? And again, the face is in this direction, just to, what's it called? Keep you oriented. You can see, it kind of goes upwards, forms a geno, and it will go here. We can't see the rest of this, but yani, that's technically what's going to happen. But yeah, that's it for this slide. But yeah, so this is everything we've basically talked about. And I want to remind you of something that I said previously in the picture that looked like this earlier in this presentation. When I said, okay, we're going to come back as to why the function of the middle ear is sound transmission. The reason that it's called sound transmission is because we're transmitting sound from the area of from the medium of air to the medium of fluids. Yes, that's why we're transmitting it. You get me? And plus we're transmitting it through the different ossicles, yada yada yada. But so we have the malleus, incus, and the stapes. Nice. And then we have the promontory, which is yeah. So this is a promontory, or the bite that the cochlea takes out of the labyrinthine or the medial wall. Okay. And then we have this is the prominence of the lateral semicircular canal. And the lateral semicircular canal, you can't really see it here unless I draw it out for you. Basically, this is a semicircular canal, and we're going to understand what those are. If I were to continue this drawing, this is the impression of lateral semicircular canal, okay? Okay. And okay. And then number six over here, that's a vestibular apparatus, which we're going to take later on. Number 7, we have the scala vestibular. Ignore the rest, because that's going to be taken in the middle ear, okay? But yeah, so obviously in front of the stapes, we're going to have the oval window. Under that, we're going to have the round window. I don't think, yeah, okay. Under that, we're going to have the round window. You can't really see it, but it's supposed to be in this area over here, okay? And what is it? We have, this is the thin plate of bone. This is the one that we call tegmen tympani, which we said is the roof of the middle ear cavity, yes? Facial, what's it called? Facial nerve and facial canal. You can't really appreciate it here, but this is it coming out after it formed the geno. So if you remember I drew it out for you and I told you that it forms a geno here and it comes out over here. This section is the one that they're showing you right here, okay? So you can't really see the geno. And oh yeah, this is the internal acoustic meatus as well. This is the facial nerve, and it's going to come from behind, go up like this, geno over here. So yeah, I hope it's clear. I hope nothing is more confusing than what it used to be. And also we took how this is the floor of the middle ear cavity. So this is the jugular floor. And then we have the eustachian tube over here. And if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, I can draw out the tensor tympani for you. And I'm going to use the red color for that. So for the tensor tympani, it's going to be here. Okay, and it's going to come above any. Oh no. Okay, it's going to be here, and it's going to technically come above the eustachian tube a little bit. Okay. And then for the stapes, or not stapes, for the stapedius muscle, it's, if I'm not wrong, it's going to attach to it like that. But yeah, you will not be able to see them, or they're not important for you to see in diagrams like this, okay? Anyways, this is clinical application. This is just all about otitis media, because otitis media is an infection of the middle ear and it can cause a bunch of other stuff. Most of this, again, will be covered in the crash course by Mohammed Fouis. Pharyngitis, otitis media, again, that is a whole thing on its own. That can cause an epidural abscess due to bone erosion, inflammatory mediator sending of the inflammatory mediators and all that kind of stuff. It can also cause facial nerve palsy because we know facial nerve is literally right there. Mastoiditis because it's very close in proximity to the mastoid air cells. And yeah, I'm just gonna stop here for this because it's gonna be explained later on. Okay, and this is where I'm gonna take a 5-minute break if you don't mind. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to move on to the inner ear, specifically the cochlea. And this section will also include the physio of hearing, okay? Now, to understand the inner ear, I want us to know that we can literally separate all these sections, okay, because they are separate. This yellow one is the cochlea, but then this one is going to be the utricle and the saccule, and this entire thing is going to be the semicircular canals. Utricle, saccule, semicircular canals, we're not really concerned about them right now. Right now, we're going to get into them later on. But so the inner ear is made of the vestibular apparatus, which is the utricle, saccule, and the semicircular canals together. And those are the ones that are mainly concerned with balance and equilibrium. That's why I said we're going to talk about them later. But we also have the cochlea for hearing, okay? Now, sound waves, we know, are basically vibrations of air molecules. Now, the way that these vibrations are oriented is through compressions and rarefactions. From the name, compression is when the air molecules are very compressed, or the sound waves compress the air molecules, and rarefaction is when that they're far apart, okay? And we're going to see exactly what that means. And then it was mentioned in the lecture, okay, single short burst of compression, which is pressure pulse, and that is followed by a continuous series of compressions or pressure waves, and we're going to see where all of that happens, okay? And then the waves, they travel in all directions. Sorry, I don't know why it's tweaking. Okay, so this is what the compressions and the rarefactions look like, okay? So the compressions, again, together, rarefactions apart. Now, we mentioned something about pressure pulse and pressure waves. Now, pressure pulse is when we have these single short bursts of compressions, so pressure here. And pressure waves is when we have the rarefaction. So they're just constant waves going throughout. Now, a little bit more about sound waves is that we need to be able to measure them some way, somehow. And back to high school physics again, we do that through frequency and amplitude or intensity, okay? So frequency is measured in hertz, and that means basically frequency means how frequent the waves are. The more frequent the waves are, the higher their pitch. So for example, if I were to blow a whistle in your ear, that is very high pitched sound, meaning high frequency. The human ear is sensitive to frequencies of about 20 to 20,000 hertz, okay? Now for intensity or amplitude, that is referring to the loudness of the sound. So that is measured in decibels, and we mentioned decibels a bunch of times previously, and this is why I said I'm just going to come back and we're going to learn more about it. So for the human ear, safe loudness or amplitude or decibels that it's allowed to hear are from 1 to 120 decibels. Beyond that, damage. Okay. So now we're moving on to the cochlea, okay? The cochlea might seem a little bit confusing, but honestly, it's pretty easy once you understand how it turns and how it twists and all that kind of stuff, okay? So remember how we said that the stapes is covering the oval window? And I mentioned time and time again that the oval window is a connection between the middle ear and the inner ear. This is why it is a connection. So the stapes literally, bismillah, the stapes literally hits on the oval window, and that oval window is directly connected to the cochlea, okay? Like, we also mentioned this other thing called the round window, and I told you, always remember that the oval window is above the round window. The round window is not really emphasized at all, at least I don't remember it being emphasized, but what the round window does is that it basically relieves some of the pressure. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine, Tayyib, I have this bottle of water, and let's just say I remove this cap, okay? Let's just imagine it's just an open water bottle, and there's water inside, and it's full. If I suction my hand onto it, okay, there's going to be huge pressure buildup inside. Unless I form like a very small membrane over here that is flexible, just a little bit flexible. So when I press down, the pressure will be relieved by just a little bit, because this flexible part of the bottle will start popping out. So we're trying to attenuate the pressure. And that is the same concept that we can apply to the round window. So the stapes, if we didn't have the round window, would hit on the oval window, pressure will build up in the cochlea, and that will more than likely damage the inner structures of the cochlea, which we obviously don't want. So we're going to attenuate that increase in pressure with every single hit of the stapes on the oval window by providing the inner ear with a round window. So that's basically what a round window is. Okay, now we're starting off with the cochlea. I want you to keep this in mind, okay? It is a spiral-shaped structure, but in most of the time, we're going to talk about it when it's unwinded like this, okay? So like that. Like cochlea, it gets its name from the Latin word cochlea, which means snail or spiral shell, okay? Like cochlea is the only organ in the inner ear that is relevant for me to hear, okay? It is necessary for the transduction of different sound frequencies, and we're going to understand what that means later on, okay? And it is divided into 3 chambers. These are the 3 chambers. Hopefully oh yay, the Zoom worked this time. Okay, here are the 3 chambers. We have the scala vestibuli, scala media, and scala tympani. Now, imagine, okay, just so I can make sure that we all get what I'm trying to say. Imagine if I cut this cochlea in half, okay? What I'm gonna see is that the cochlea is divided into 3. So that is exactly what we did in this area. And if I were to continue this drawing out for you, okay? If I want to continue this drawing, I would continue it like this, okay? Kida. This is another turn of the cochlea. This is one turn of the cochlea. And I basically took a cross section of it, okay? And then we find these 3 chambers inside, okay? Nice. Okay, now, these 3 chambers are very relevant to me because it translates to how the cochlea looks like when it's not spiraled. It's actually more clear in this picture because in this picture, the scala media is this yellow line, which obviously it's not a yellow line. So let's just imagine it here, okay? Like this upper, what's it called? This upper chamber is called the scala vestibuli, okay? And if you notice, the scala vestibuli and this other blue chamber, which is the scala tympani, are connected to each other. Where are they connected? They're connected at the helicotrema. The helicotrema is the apex of the cochlea, okay? So the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani are connected and they meet at the helicotrema of the cochlea. In between them, we have the scala media. And to understand more of the anatomy, okay, we need to actually look closer at the scala media, okay? The scala media it looks small, okay, and it's in between everything, but it's the most important part of my cochlea, okay? So, in the scala media, we have this very important structure called the organ of Corti. The organ of Corti is the only reason that we can hear anything. If we didn't have it, we're not going to be able to hear a single thing. Play. Another thing that's relevant in the scala media is this stria vascularis, which we'll get into in a bit, and we're going to understand why it's relevant and what its function is. Okay, play. Now, in order to separate between the scala media and the scala tympani, which is the one below it, we have this basilar membrane. The basilar membrane will be mentioned a lot because we're going to talk about it in terms of vibration, and we're going to understand how that happens in a bit. To separate the scala media from the scala vestibuli, we have the Reisner's membrane, which is the one above it. Okay? Okay. Is there anything that I missed here? Okay, yeah. The scala vestibuli and the scala tympani, they sense pressure changes. What does that mean? That means that the pressure changes are coming from the stapes hitting on the oval window. So since they're connected, they're the ones that are mostly going to be receiving that change in pressure, not the scala media. It is separate, okay? It rarely communicates, not even rarely, it does not communicate. It does not physically communicate with the scala tympani or the vestibuli, okay? Okay. Now, moving on. This is what it looks like. This is a much better, also, I'm sorry about the unclear pictures. I tried scouring Google to make them clear, but I just couldn't, okay? But anyways, this is what it looks like. This is what the cross sections should look like, okay? Here we have the stapes hitting on the oval window. This is the oval window over here under it. Then we have the round window to attenuate that pressure that's going to be coming into the cochlea. And as the stapes hits on the oval window, the fluid, okay, the fluid inside of the scala vestibuli, I don't know if I mentioned, are they fluid filled? Anyways, they're fluid filled, okay? The fluid inside of the scala vestibuli will start to move, okay? As fluid would normally do if I were to push it, okay? The fluid inside of the scala vestibuli will begin to move, okay? and it will go up and up and up and up and up. And remember how I said that the scala vestibuli and the tympani are connected at the helicotrema? That means that as the fluid is moving at the scala vestibuli, when it reaches the helicotrema, that same movement of fluid will continue at the scala tympani. Okay, fine. This is relevant when we understand what's going to happen to the scala media. But this is what the cross section looks like. This is the scala vestibuli. This is the scala media. We said the separation between the scala vestibuli and the scala media is the Reisner's membrane. And this is the scala tympani, and the separation between the scala media and the scala tympani is the basilar membrane. And on the lining of the scala media, we have the stria vascularis, which we will look at in a bit. Fine. Just a few more tiny anatomical details about the cochlea that you need to know is the fact that it is about 35 millimeters in length, okay? And it has 2.5 turns. So that's 1, 2.5, okay? 1, 2.5, okay? Now the blue arrow is the oval window and the yellow arrow is the round window. Again, oval window above round. Okay. Now, there are fluid-filled cavities. Let's explain. This obviously, number 1 is the scala vestibuli, okay? Number 2 is the scala media. Scala tympani, okay? Since they are connected at the helicotrema, logically speaking, it doesn't make sense that they don't have the same fluid. So they will have and contain the same fluid. That fluid being perilymph. Now, perilymph, okay, is a fluid that has a very similar composition to CSF, okay? What this means that it is very rich in sodium and chloride, but very poor in potassium and calcium, which you can appreciate with how big sodium and chloride symbols are and how small potassium and calcium are. Like, so again, perilymph, which is the fluid inside of the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani, is very similar in composition to CSF or cerebrospinal fluid, which is very rich in sodium and chloride, but very poor in potassium and calcium. Now, this leaves it with a very slightly negative or fully neutral charge. Why? That is because the sodium and the chloride are pretty much equal, or the chloride can just go a little bit above the sodium. It's like a very delicate balance and it doesn't really matter, okay? All you need to know is that it can be neutral or very slightly negative. That's it. But the perilymph, actually, in the scala vestibuli, specifically, it originates from the blood plasma across the hematoperiolymphatic barrier. Nothing much to explain about here. This is just a memorization kind of thing. So, perilymph in the scala vestibuli comes from the blood plasma across the hematoperiolymphatic barrier. In the scala tympani, which is number 2 over here, it comes from the CSF directly. Okay? So that's it for perilymph. Perilymph in the scala vestibuli and tympani, very close to CSF, meaning very high in sodium and chloride, very low in potassium and calcium. It has a very neutral or a slightly negative charge. In the scala vestibuli, it comes from the blood plasma across the hematoperiolymphatic barrier. And in the scala tympani, it comes directly from the CSF. Now, for the endolymph, which is the second fluid, obviously will go to the third cavity, which is the scala media. Third cavity, again, the scala media is not connected to the scala vestibuli and the tympani. That's why I mentioned it's not, that's why I mentioned that. It's not logical for it to have the same fluid. Obviously, it's going to be different. The difference here is that it's endolymph, okay? It's literally going to be the opposite. It's not like CSF, okay? It's the opposite. It's going to be very rich in potassium and chloride, okay? But very poor in sodium. But since potassium has a very, since potassium is higher in concentration that chloride is in the endolymph of the scala media, it will have a net positive charge, okay? Now, you see these cells over here? These cells are the ones that I mentioned previously, the stria vascularis. They are important, okay? Because they're the ones that secrete potassium, and they make that net positive charge of the endolymph, okay? Nice. Now, the only thing in the scala media that is special technically is the fact that the stereocilia, okay, which we will get into more detail about later on, they are a very integral part of the organ of Corti, which we previously mentioned. These stereocilia are not full of endolymph. No, they are full of perilymph, okay? And that is just the way that it is, anatomically speaking, okay? But if we're talking on a physiological level, the reason that this is because the difference between the endolymph and the perilymph, okay, the voltage difference between them, because obviously this has a net positive voltage, aka the 80 millivolts, right? And this is either neutral or slightly negative, right? The perilymph, we said, is neutral or slightly negative. This will provide us with a voltage difference or a voltage gradient, an electrochemical gradient, and we're going to call this the endocochlear potential. The reason that this is important is because that specifically is the driving force that will power these hair cells that are a part of the organ of corti to begin moving and transduce the mechanical sound waves and vibrations into electrical signals that will go to the cochlear nerve. Okay, I hope I was clear, and I hope that this is okay. So just a little recap. Endolymph is in the scala media. It is rich in potassium and chloride. It has a very net positive charge, about 80 millivolts, and it's very poor in sodium. And the potassium is secreted by these cells, which are the striae vascularis. The only part of the scala media that is not saturated with endolymph are the hair cells, and that is because it is just the way that it is anatomically, but it provides us with the endocochlear potential, or that electrochemical gradient that will drive these hair cells to translate the mechanical force of the sound vibrations into electrical signals that we can process in our central nervous system. Okay, now the organ of corti. The organ of corti is this structure over here. This entire thing we can call the organ of corti, okay? It is composed of a bunch of different things. Remember how I said that the lining, the bottom or the floor of the scala media, the one that separates the scala media from the scala tympani, is the basilar membrane? Like, this is the basilar membrane. It's back, okay? Like, above the basilar membrane, we have the organ of corti. This organ of corti, it is composed of a bunch of cells. Yani these cells are not relevant to us. The cells that are relevant to us are these outer hair cells and the inner hair cells. For the outer hair cells, normally, anatomically speaking, you can have 3 to 4 rows of these outer hair cells, okay? And you can have only 1 row of inner hair cells, okay? Nice. Now, this Y-shaped thing, these are called the, what's it called? The rods of corti, okay? Oh, yeah, they're literally right here, the rods of corti. And another thing I would like to mention, which is very, very important, is that these hair cells, they don't just float kida. La, they are connected to something else. That's something else being the tectorial membrane. Remember tectonic plates, movement of tectonic plates. You can kind of figure out what the tectorial membrane does because of the tectonic plates. So the tectorial membrane will move, okay? And we're going to understand what the movement is, what it's all about, why it is, yada, yada. But one other thing that I would like to mention is the innervation of the outer hair. Actually, we're going to mention that later on. Let's just keep it at this for now, okay? Did I miss anything? Oh, yeah, okay. So these hair cells, they have neurons coming out of them, and they're going to synapse at the spiral ganglion. This spiral ganglion, from all the hair cells that are in the scala media, all around the cochlea, will end up coming together to form the cochlear nerve. Now, you're probably wondering, hey, I thought it was called the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8. It's called the vestibulocochlear nerve because it's innervating the vestibular apparatus, which we mentioned earlier, and the cochlea. Now, the 2 nerves, we have the vestibular nerve and the cochlear nerve, will eventually join to make the cranial nerve number 8, okay? Yeah, and one other thing is that we're going to re-explain this in a bit because there's more physio under it, but the outer hair cells kind of regulate and protect the inner hair cells from very loud sounds or from very outrageous stimulation, okay? So without these outer hair cells, we could 100% have very significant hearing loss, okay? Like, these pictures are insanely blurry, but I tried finding them and I couldn't, okay? Even Google reverse image search didn't help me, which is funny because that is always the case for me, subhanAllah. Okay, anyways, so the scala media is also known as the cochlear duct. So don't get confused if they ask you about the cochlear duct or whatever. La, it's also called the cochlear duct. وبعدين the scala tympani also called the vestibular duct. Scala vestibuli also called the vestibular duct. The scala tympani also called the tympanic duct, okay? Fine. Okay. So this is talking a little bit more about the physio, okay, of how these hair cells move and what they do, okay? Fine. This is a zoom in of the organ of corti. These are the hair cells. We have the 3 to 4 rows of outer hair cells, and this is the inner hair cell. And obviously, we can see the neurons that will eventually come and synapse at the spiral ganglion. So that is the spiral ganglion, and that will eventually become the cochlear nerve, okay? Fine. Then we have the tectorial membrane overlying them. The way that things work, okay, is that number 1, 2 things. We said the electrochemical gradient will be the driving force for these hair cells, right? Remember how we said, okay, these hair cells are actually, they're covered in endolymph, in perilymph, not endolymph, but the rest of the scala media is covered by endolymph. So first of all, we have the effect of the electrochemical gradient, which will drive these hair cells to sense vibrations, but also, quite literally, the vibrations of the fluid passing through these cavities will cause the basilar membrane to sense them. When the basilar membrane senses them, this is the basilar membrane, it's obviously going to cause these hair cells to start moving, okay? Like, this is what, okay, let's just go here and then I'll go back, okay? So when these hair cells start moving, a couple of things can happen. Like, number one, you need to understand the anatomy of the hair cell itself. This is, let's just say, the inner hair cell. In the inner hair cell, we have different sizes of stereocilia. These are all called stereocilia. The longest or the biggest one is going to be called the kinocilia. And then the rest are, they're the stereocilia, okay? Fine. What happens is, when the vibrations are sensed, okay? If all the hair cells move towards the kinocilia, this biggest one, we're going to have depolarization, okay? Meaning that we have these channels over here in between each one of the hair cells. They're called, or the cilia, they're called tip links, okay? Tip links, okay, are simultaneously connected to potassium channels. And obviously, we know if we put a bunch of potassium in a cell, what's going to happen? It's going to depolarize, right? So when we move the hair cells towards the kinocilia, that will cause the tip links to open, and that will cause potassium channels to cause a potassium influx, which will begin the depolarization inside the cell. This depolarization will open calcium channels, okay, that will cause a calcium influx, and that will go to, for example, the Golgi apparatus or the endoplasmic reticulum, and start increasing the release of vesicles that contain neurotransmitters such as glutamate, okay? But then this glutamate is going to go and stimulate just with the spiral ganglion, then it's going to go transmit electrical signals to the cochlear nerve, vestibular cochlear nerve, but then that will go to the rest of the CNS, and we're going to talk about that later on. But I hope depolarization is clear. So hair cell or the cilia move towards kinocilia, open tip links, open potassium channels, potassium influx, depolarization, open calcium channels, cause vesicles of neurotransmitters to be released, specifically glutamate, which will go from the afferent nerve to the brain. Okay? In the case where they move away from the kinocilia, that is when we do not get a depolarization. When they move away from the kinocilia, we have the closure, the tip links will remain closed. We have no potassium influx, no depolarization, no glutamate being released. So no action potential, no nothing, no stimulation, no nothing. You're not hearing anything. Okay? Like, back to this. We talked about the kinocilia, the stereocilia, how they move towards the kinocilia, yada, yada, yada. And I know from this picture, it looks like they're literally just hairs going like this, like that, but they're not. They're actually kind of like, they're more pyramid in shape, okay? So this big, large one, that's the kinocilium, okay? And the rest are the stereocilia. So if they all move, okay? So if they all move towards this direction, we're going to get that depolarization we are looking for. But if they move away from the kinocilia in that way, then we have no activation, no nothing, okay? And you can see, there are bundles of these cilia in every single one of these hair cells. And as I previously mentioned, the outer hair cells, we can have 3 to 4 rows. Inner hair cells, we can have 1. Again, these are the basilar rods, and this is the tectorial membrane, because that's what the cilia are connected to. And yeah, the tectorial membrane will also sense that shift, okay? Nice. So we're done with that. Now, remember how I said that the outer hair cells kind of have, wait, actually, let's go back, okay? Okay, we said that, where is it? The outer hair cells regulate the sensitivity of the inner hair cells to different sound pitches, which is tuning, okay? Damage to the outer hair cells will cause significant hearing loss, yada, yada, yada. How does that happen, okay? Firstly, you need to understand the reason that we have 3 to 4 rows is mainly due to everything that I said, the whole protection, sensitivity, whatever. The way that this occurs, okay, is that these outer hair cells, instead of releasing glutamate like the way that we know that the inner hair cells do, they instead release acetylcholine, okay? So whenever there's a loud sound playing, okay, what's going to happen is that is going to be sensed by the superior olivary nucleus, whatever, and that's going to be affected plate. But more importantly, the outer hair cells have a very special kind of superpower, which is on their lateral wall. They have this protein or these molecules called Preston molecules, okay? When these Preston molecules expand, they will literally cause the outer hair cell to elongate, okay? So if we go back here, imagine, طيب, I put a speaker in your ear and I blast the loudest song known to man, okay? What's going to happen is that these Preston molecules on the lateral side of your outer hair cells, they will begin to elongate and expand, which will cause this entire outer hair cell to become longer, which will what? It will cover that space between the tectorial membrane, okay? And between the tectorial membrane and where the hair cells are embedded, and it will protect the inner hair cell from that loud sound, okay? Okay, and one last important thing that I would like to mention is that the outer hair cells are supplied by efferent neurons, okay, hence why the acetylcholine. The inner hair cells are supplied by afferent neurons, hence why the glutamate, okay? Okay. So yeah, the basically what this is gonna do, okay, they're gonna go down through the basilar membrane, but then they're gonna go up through the tectorial membrane. That will not allow the tectorial membrane to move anymore, which will decrease the stimulation going on in the inner hair cell. Okay, now this is what the cochlea looks like if we unwind it. What I want us to understand from this concept is, how do we recognize sound? So for example, how do you recognize a whistle in comparison to like a bass, okay, like the bass guitar? The way that you do that, okay, is through pitch recognition. The cochlea is very specialized in that. And what this means, okay, is that the cells in the cochlea, very close to the stapes, around the oval window in this area, they sense very, very high-pitched sounds. So if I come up to your ear and I screech the loudest, highest pitched screech I've ever made, the part of the cochlea that would recognize that is the one that is very close to the stapes. On the other hand, if a heavy bass starts playing next to your ear, the part of the cochlea that will recognize that is the part that is closest to the helicotrema. Meaning that the base part, the base of the basilar membrane, okay, that is the base of the basilar membrane. Okay, yeah. So the base of the cochlea, the basilar membrane in the base of the cochlea is more tuned to higher frequencies, meaning the whistles, the screams, the screeches, all that kind of stuff. And then the apex, or the helicotrema, nearer to the helicotrema, it is tuned for lower frequencies, okay? And we can see that, by the frequency of the wave, kaza. And yeah, so this is what this slide is all about. Now, this is an overgeneralization of how hearing works, and we're going to review everything that we said, okay? Sound waves are going to come, and they're going to hit the tympanic membrane. And actually, over here, you can quite literally highlight the compressions and the rarefactions that we were talking about, okay? So they're going to hit the tympanic membrane. That is going to cause the malleus to start shaking. But then the incus is going to start shaking after it. Then that is going to cause the stapes to hit on the oval window. That is directly connected to the cochlea. When it is connected specifically to the scala vestibuli. In the scala vestibuli, we're going to have the movement of the perilymph. Yada yada is going to go up helicotrema, yay, go to the scala tympani. Then don't forget, we have the electrochemical gradient. And we also have the irritation of the basilar membrane as the fluid moves throughout the cochlea. And that is going to cause these, let's go back to a picture of the hair cells. That is going to cause these hair cells to begin to move, okay? Now, if they move towards the kinocilia, we said we're going to open the tip links, cause potassium channels to open, causing a potassium influx, which will depolarize the cell. And that will open these calcium channels, which will cause vesicles to release neurotransmitters such as glutamate, and that will go to the cochlear nerve, but then it will go and stimulate a bunch of other stuff. In the case where they go against or away from the kinocilia, none of that is going to happen, okay? And then obviously all these signals, we said that the hair cells are actually innervated by neurons that will eventually synapse and form a spiral ganglion, and then all the spiral ganglions will eventually come together to form this cochlear nerve over here, which will eventually transmit its signals through the vestibular cochlear nerve, etc., etc. Now, this is same recap. Vibration of basilar membrane, the one at the bottom, that will cause displacement of the hairs. We're going to have opening of the transduction channels, which are the tip links, and the influx of that will cause influx of the potassium ions. That will cause the hair cell to depolarize. That will open the voltage-gated calcium channels, causing a calcium influx. That will cause synaptic release of neurotransmitters, specifically glutamate in the inner cell, and that will cause a response in the cochlear nerve. Then that will be transmitted to the medulla, etc., or the medulla. Okay. And yeah, just a quick review. Outer hair cell innervated by efferent, inner hair cell innervated by afferent. Outer hair cell has prestin to be so it can be able to protect the inner hair cells, which are the important, more vital ones, from louder sounds that we do not want to damage our ear. Okay. Okay. Now, this is pretty easy. Okay, I know some of us, or at least I found it to be difficult previously, but it's honestly, and once you explain it and you see it happening and all that kind of stuff, it becomes really easy. So inshallah, it will be easy this time around. But from the cochlear nerve, okay, here we have the spiral ganglion over here, then we have the cochlear nerve. From the cochlear nerve, where do we want to go if we want ourselves to be able to recognize the speech that we're listening to be able to understand anything that's going on around us, to be able to categorize sounds that we're hearing, from podcasts to music to what else? Podcast to music to annoying tapping of someone's pen or annoying clicking of someone's pen, things like that. How do we want to make sure that we are able to do that? Right? That is through the auditory pathway. Now, this auditory pathway has relay nuclei that interrupt the pathway. Okay, relay nuclei, not structures. Okay, because if we mention structures, I would be able to mention to you, okay, cochlear nucleus, but then superior olivary nucleus, but then nucleus of lateral limit. No, the specific nuclei that I'm talking about are only the cochlear nucleus, superior olivary nucleus, and the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. Inferior colliculus is not considered a nucleus. Medial geniculate body, that's not a nucleus. Okay, so that's what they mean by 3 additional relay nuclei. Okay, but these nuclei are considered to be interruptions before any of the signals that we got from the cochlear nerve go to the cortex. One thing that you need to know about the cortex, or specifically where we're going to end up in, is that in the left side of our brain, in the left cortex, it is much bigger than the right side because we have Wernicke's area. I don't know specifically where we took Wernicke's and Broca's aphasia. Maybe it was HNS. Honestly, my memory is pretty blurry. But basically Wernicke's and Broca's areas. Also, you did take this in that one lecture in neuro. But anyways, so they're all specific or function towards speech and sound recognition, being able to translate what you want to say into words, right? So if you know anything about Wernicke's aphasia, you know that people that have it, they have very coherent speaking, but it is nonsensical. So for example, maybe they want to say, hey, I want to drink water from this bottle. They might say, oh, duck, mouse, sit, table, whatever, so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So the left cortical area is bigger than the right, okay, or larger than the right, because it is closely associated with the Wernicke's area for speech, okay? Fine. Now let's understand the pathway. Let me pull up with my pen. Fine. We have the cochlear nerve. Firstly, we have dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei, okay? Obviously, signals from the cochlear nerve will go and they will go to the ventral and the dorsal cochlear nuclei, but then all that, okay? After that, they're going to cross contralaterally, okay, to the superior olivary nucleus, okay? From the superior olivary nucleus, they're going to go up through the lateral lemniscus to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. That is our third and final relay nuclei, okay? After the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, it will continue upwards and it will go to the inferior colliculus, okay? Inferior colliculus, this is at the level of the midbrain, okay? And then from there, it will go to the medial geniculate body. This is at the level of the thalamus. And then from the medial geniculate body, it will go to the cortex for speech and higher functions, okay? So that's essentially what occurs. And this is specifically, and if we want to use the left-right rule, this is specifically for the right side. So if it was happening on the left, the same thing would, and you would have the same thing going on. We have the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei over here. They would, what's it called? Cross contralaterally to the superior olivary nucleus over here. That will go through through the lateral lemniscus, nucleus of lateral lemniscus, and inferior colliculus, yada yada. Okay. So yeah. Now, the cochlear nerve maintains its cochlear spatial organization as it enters the CNS, and this is preserved within each of the cochlear relay nuclei such that they transmit different frequencies in tonotopic order. Pause. What does that mean? To put it simply, I don't think the lectures went into any details about this, but to put it simply, tonal refers to frequency, tonal frequency. Topo means place, okay? Like topographic location or whatever, place, okay? So what this means is that the ventral and the dorsal nuclei, ventral and the dorsal cochlear nuclei, each one of them can sense a specific frequency and a specific area or place of sound. And we're not going to go into those details, but that's what essentially what this paragraph means, okay? And it maintains that because the signals coming from the ventral and the dorsal are going to be very specific, and they're not just going to send out any electrical signals they receive. No, that's not how it works, okay? So now, this is just another picture of the same exact thing. But over here, now we're adding more context as to what each one of the nuclei does, okay, or each one of the areas does, okay. Firstly, again, we have the cochlea, cochlear nerve. We have the cochlear nuclei, okay. Those we said will cross contralaterally to the superior olivary nucleus, up the lateral lemniscus to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. From there, it will go to the inferior colliculus, by then medial geniculate body, and then the cortex. Now, what if I tell you that the superior olivary nucleus is important for sound localization? If I, for example, if someone is speaking from here and I didn't have a superior olivary nucleus, I would think that I wouldn't be able to tell them that they're speaking from there. Okay, they might be speaking from anywhere around me, but that is purely because I don't have a superior olivary nucleus. So it is important for sound localization. Where is this sound coming from? The inferior colliculus, okay, which is this one, literally this one. It is sensitive to location, absolute intensity, rates of intensity change, and frequency. Basically, important for pattern categorization. What this means, okay, is that the main reason that you can differentiate between someone throwing a pen at a wall or the sound of music, shout out to that song and that movie actually, and throwing a pen on the wall, or the sound of typing, or someone singing, or someone recording a podcast. The reason that you can tell the difference is because of the sensitivity to location, absolute intensity, rates of intensity change, and frequency that all occur at the inferior colliculus. So pattern categorization. You're categorizing different kinds of sounds that you're hearing. بعدين, descending cortical influences will modify the input from the medial geniculate nucleus. This is important as an adaptive filter. First of all, the medial geniculate nucleus, this is a part of the thalamus, if you remember from neuro. Essentially, what happens is that there is a what's it called, like a back-to-back between the cortex and the medial geniculate body. The reason that is because even if we receive the signals from the medial geniculate body and they go to the cortex, that's not enough, okay? Before the cortex even begins, okay, initiates its recognition of what kind of sound you're listening to, what it does is that it will make it better, okay? It will modify it, okay? So I'm gonna give you an example to help you understand what I mean by that, okay? So let's just say I'm in a very crowded room and I'm trying to speak to this one person in front of me. Everyone around me is speaking. I want to make sure that I can only hear what this person is saying, okay? Now, obviously, my ear is not going to isolate sound for me, okay? My superior olivary nucleus is not going to isolate sound for me. It might help me with the location and its intensity, but it's not going to isolate it for me. Same thing goes for the inferior colliculus, same thing goes for the lateral lemniscus or whatever, it doesn't matter. Or the medial geniculate body, what is gonna do that for me is actually the cortex. The cortex, or my brain, knows that, hey, you want to listen to this person that's right in front of you. I'm gonna help you do that. I'm gonna help you cancel out all the background noise. We're trying to reduce it as much as possible, and we're going to focus on this one person listening in front of you. That's why it is important to understand the function of these descending cortical influences. Adaptive filter. So yeah, now this is about how electrical signals work. If, for example, your right ear is hearing more than your left ear, or if the sound is literally right here, not right here, okay? So let's just imagine, let's just say I'm the same position as this person over here, okay? We're talking about my left ear, there's a speaker right here, it's playing some music, okay? Playing. Since it's playing music in my left ear, what's gonna happen is that obviously the cochlear nerve from my left ear is gonna go to the left ventral and dorsal cochlear nuclei. Those will go to the contralateral superior olivary nucleus. Yes. Now, because once it goes to the contralateral superior olivary nucleus, that nucleus itself, it knows that the electrical signals for hearing, they're coming from the left specifically. Why? The reason that it knows, not the reason, because it knows what it's going to do is that it is going to inhibit the signals that are coming from the right, because obviously your left ear is being stimulated more than your right, right? So essentially, the stronger stimulus to the left ear will excite the left superior olivary nucleus. Okay, this stimulus will also inhibit the right superior olivary nucleus. Okay, ignore MNTB interneuron; it's not relevant at all. Okay, and that excitation from the left side is greater than the inhibition on the right, so that will result in a net excitation to the higher centers, specifically coming from the left, and then the inhibition, okay, from the left side relative to the right side is much greater than the excitation on the right, meaning that we are going to receive no signals from the right side. So our brain, or the higher centers, they're only going to perceive sound coming from the left. Okay, and I put this in here to like maybe draw it out in case it wasn't clear, but I think it's clear. We can we can review it very quickly right now, just before we move on. From the cochlea, we have the cochlear nerve. They will go to the cochlear nucleus. Okay, those will cross over to the opposite superior olivary nucleus. Yeah, those will cross over to the superior olivary nucleus. That will go up the lateral lemniscus. That will go to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, continue upwards to the inferior colliculus. Then that will go to the medial geniculate, inferior colliculus in the midbrain. That will go up to the medial geniculate body, which is a part of the thalamus, and that will go to the cortex. Cortex. And then we're going to get these descending cortical entrances. Okay. So now we're starting off with the vestibular apparatus, okay? So the vestibular apparatus is what I told you previously is a saccule, utricle, and the semicircular canals. Like, we can split the vestibular apparatus into two. We have the otolithic organs, and then we have the semicircular canals. The otolithic organs are the utricle and the saccule, and those are the ones that are responsible for static equilibrium. What static equilibrium is, okay, is, let's just imagine I'm sitting straight, and I'm in a car, and we're driving. The reason that I can sense that we're moving, even if I had a blindfold on and everything, the reason that I can sense that we are moving forward is because of these otolithic organs, okay? But let's just say, and I turn my head this way. Okay, I close my eyes and I'm unconsciously turning my head this way. I know I'm turning my head to the left, or I think you're right, because of the semicircular canals, because they are responsible for dynamic equilibrium, okay? Fine. I hope that was clear. Okay. So now we can also anatomically categorize the vestibular apparatus, okay? We have the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth, okay? The bony labyrinth is basically the whole cochlea, the vestibule, okay? And the semicircular canals. Vestibule is the connection between the cochlea and the semicircular canals and the utricle and the saccule, okay? But we can also have the membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth is everything that is in dark blue over here, okay? So that includes the cochlear ducts, that includes the saccule and the utricle, and that also includes the semicircular ducts, not the canal, the ducts, okay? It's important to make sure that you separate those two. So the bony labyrinth is all the light blue, and the membranous labyrinth is all the dark blue. So to recap, bony labyrinth, we have the cochlea, the vestibule, and the semicircular canals. The membranous labyrinth, we have the cochlear duct, okay, utricle and the saccule, and the semicircular ducts. Okay, now, the reason that we want to differentiate between them is because they are also filled with fluid, and the fluid that they're filled with is obviously going to be different. Now, in the bony, so obviously the bony labyrinth surrounds the membranous labyrinth, okay? Inside the membranous labyrinth, we have endolymph, okay? Remember how I said that the scala media is also known as the cochlear duct? Inside the scala media, what do we have? Endolymph. And we also know that it is a part of the membranous labyrinth, right? So since the utricle and the saccule and the semicircular ducts are also a part of the membranous labyrinth, they're going to contain the same fluid, which is the endolymph. Endolymph is like extracellular fluid, okay? We said, you know, hey, it's rich in potassium and some chloride, very poor in sodium. You remember? Yeah. And then the bony labyrinth, the bony part of the cochlea, which is the scala vestibuli and the scala tympani, those are filled with perilymph, right? Which we said is like CSF. Now, because the rest of the bony labyrinth includes the vestibule and the semicircular canals, those are also going to be filled with perilymph. Okay, this is just another representation. Okay. Obviously we have the cochlea over here, but then this is the saccule, this is the utricle. The utricle and the saccule are very important structures that we're gonna learn a lot more about in a bit. Okay. This entire area, okay, and if I were to put a square on this area, that is what we call the vestibule. Okay, it's kind of like a connection. These are the rest of the semicircular canals, and we're gonna understand how all of those work in a bit. Okay. Like, and this is cupullae and macula. Okay, so pause. Cupullae are the ones that are in these semicircular canals. Okay, these three. And the macula, or the maculae, or whatever, they're the ones that are in the utricle and the saccule. Okay, and we're gonna see how they're different, etc. Okay, nice. Right. Now, going to the autolytic organs, which we said are only the utricle and the saccule. Okay, they are connected to each other via the utriculosaccular duct, which is this one. Okay, so so this one is going to be the utricle, and this one's going to be the saccule, and they're connected to each other via the utriculosaccular duct. Okay. This endolymphatic duct and the sac, they're going to come in later on, because we're going to see okay, the saccule has two different openings. One is to this and one is to that, and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay. So anyways, yeah. So what we need to know, okay, is specifically, okay, sorry, yeah, it lagged for a bit. I got scared. Okay. What we need to know is specifically the orientation of the macula, okay, of the utricle and the saccule. Because remember how I said, okay, we have the cupula and the macula. Cupula are only in the semicircular canals, and macula are in the utricle and the saccule, yes? What macula and cupula are basically collections of hair cells. Now, to understand the orientation of the collection of these hair cells in the saccule and the utricle, it is important to realize or understand their functions, okay? Like, this is inaccurate. The reason that this is inaccurate is because this is not how the entire structures in the inner ear sit in your ear when you're standing upright. When I'm standing upright, this is not what they look like, okay? The reason that I'm saying this is because this is the one that's accurate. The saccule is the one that's vertical, and the utricle is the one that's horizontal or on the floor, yes? And if you look at this, it looks like the utricle is the one that's on the wall, and then the saccule is the one that's on the floor. But actually, when you're sitting upright, this is the correct stance, okay? Like, so they are a collection of hair cells, and they're oriented so that the saccule is vertical. The hair cells of it are vertical, okay? So, okay, wait, let me, boom, okay. So, let's just say, this is the macula of the saccule, okay? The hair cells are oriented this way, okay? Meanwhile, because it's obviously on the vertical, on the y-axis, okay? Meanwhile, on the x-axis or on the floor, we have the macula of the utricle, right? So the hair cells are going to be oriented this way, and that is the x-axis. Like, why is that different? It's different because since this is on the x-axis, aka the macula of the utricle is on the x-axis, it will recognize or be more keen to recognizing horizontal acceleration, aka things like car brakes, okay? Meanwhile, since the saccule is vertical, okay, on the y-axis, it will be more prone to recognizing and sensing vertical equilibrium and acceleration. For example, an elevator. If I close my eyes while I'm in an elevator, I'd still be able to tell whether I'm going up or down, and that is thanks to the saccule. If I'm in the car, again, I have my blindfold on. I am not the driver, but I'm being driven. I know when we're going back, when we're going front, because of my utricle. Okay? Let me. Nice. Now, not nice. Completely forgot and missed this one. Okay. So they both contain hair cells with stereocilia and craniocilia. Literally, very, 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 very similar mechanism to what we learned in the organ of Corti. Okay? Fine. Let's dive deeper into it. Now we're looking at inside the utricle, yes? Oops. Now we're looking at inside the utricle. Inside the utricle, okay, we have the same concept, craniocilia, stereocilia. Great. Fine. Okay. The difference here, okay, is that these cilia, they are encased, or they are encased, not in tectorial membrane. No, now it's completely different. They're encased in this gelatinous object, or not object, this gelatinous substance that is called the autolytic membrane, okay? This autolytic membrane is the one that sits on top of these sensory cells, okay? Fine. Now, on top of the autolytic membrane, on top of the hair cells or the hair cells and the cilia, we have autoconia or otoliths. Pause. What are they? This is the main reason that the saccule and the utricle are called otolithic organs. It's because they contain these autoconia and these otoliths, okay? What they are is very small stones made of calcium carbonate, okay, and other proteins. And these stones are very, very, very sensitive to movements, okay? So if I'm going horizontal axis, these stones will go back and front. And so they're going to stimulate my hair cells, right? Going back and front. So that's essentially what causes this entire sensing mechanism of horizontal movements for the utricle and the vertical movements for the saccule, right? Yeah, so these supporting cells are also known as the sustentacular cells, which are the ones that are producing this autolytic membrane, the gelatinous substance that we talked about. And yeah, that's it. Now moving on to the saccule, okay? So in the saccule, uh, one second. Okay, it started tweaking again. Okay, in the saccule, same structure as the utricle, okay? But this time it's vertical, okay? And it is more sensitive to up and down movements. And the saccule actually has two small openings, hence why I use this picture, because the two small openings are very clear. We talked about the, I very, very briefly mentioned the tina, this endolymphatic duct, which will lead to the endolymphatic sac. This is one of the openings of the saccule, okay? The second one is the canalis ruinans, or ruinians, which is the connection to the cochlea, okay, from the saccule to the cochlea. But that's basically it. That's all you need to know about the saccule. Literally the same thing as utricle, the whole autoconia, otoliths, with autolytic membrane, and the sustentacular or the supporting cells. We have type 1, type 2 hair cell. You don't really know, you need to know the difference between them, the movements and everything. Literally the same. Difference is saccule is vertical, utricle is horizontal. Saccule has two other openings, which are the endolymphatic duct, which will lead to the endolymphatic sac, and the canalus ruinans, or the Ruenian's canal, okay, which will lead to the cochlea. And that's it for saccule. Now we're moving on to the semicircular canals. Inshallah, the last section. Okay, so the semicircular canals are honestly my favorite because they're very, very interesting. I know I said middle ear, oh my god, my favorite, whatever. I was lying. It's the semicircular canals for me, honestly. But the semicircular canals are very interesting to me because of how they do all the work for you. It's crazy. They are oriented in ways that will allow you to understand rotational movements. So for example, it's no longer forward and back. It's no longer up and down. Remember how I said that the semicircular canals are mainly for dynamic equilibrium? Let's go back. Here. The semicircular canals I said are for dynamic equilibrium, meaning that you are moving. You're the one that's moving. If you're moving and rotating, what's going to recognize that are the semicircular canals. Okay? Now, it detects movement on three different planes, okay? Obviously, we have the horizontal, x-axis. Then we have the anterior, okay? Okay? Kida. And then we have the posterior, back, okay? So each one of the canals will contain a semicircular duct, which is the component of the semicircular area that is from the membranous labyrinth, okay? Okay. Like, this picture is to show you how they are oriented if we're looking at the top of someone's head, okay? The way that they're oriented is we have this green one. This green one is horizontal. This one is like a kida, this plane. Then we have the anterior one is this direction. Then the posterior one, that direction. It's pretty self-explanatory. Like, then I have it explained on this other what's it called, picture, because it literally shows you the planes for you. Like, the red is the horizontal one, which is the red dotted one. That's the horizontal semicircular canal. Then we have the anterior one, which is this green one, and you can see the axis of the green one, how it works and how you can recognize the movement from there. And then we have the posterior semicircular canal, and you can see the planes for that. Okay, fine. Now for this swellings and the ampulla or whatever, okay, yeah. So as you can see, this is a semicircular canal, right? Ignore which one it is. Doesn't really matter to me right now. What's important to me is that you realize that at the base of each one of the semicircular canals, we have these swellings or these enlargements called the ampulla. these ampulla are the macula, okay, of the utricle and the sacula. Same function. They're called the ampulla. They contain this thing called the cupula. Remember when we said, oh, cupula and macula, but macula is in the utricle and the sacula, and cupula or is in the semicircular canal? Well, yeah, that's what I meant. So the cupula are in the ampulla, which are big and not big. They're enlarged swellings at the base of each one of these semicircular canals, and they're the ones that are mainly going to recognize that rotational movement that we have been talking about. Okay, so we're done with this. We understand what the ampulla is now. What this slide is supposed to show you is the orientation of the different semicircular canals, because this allows us to understand how they recognize like spatial awareness, almost like not spatial, but how they are aware of the rotation that goes on each different side. Okay, play. Here's what I mean. This is obviously the right side of this person, and this is the left side, right? Play. So this means that this one over, let me just write out, why am I tweaking? Okay, this means that this one over here, this one is the horizontal semicircular canal. Yes, yani this is the posterior, this is the anterior. Okay, that is clear. Like, what I am trying to link here is the fact that the anterior semicircular canal's plane is parallel to, on the right side, is parallel to the posterior semicircular canal's plane on the left side. You see how they're all going in the same direction? This is the left PC, or the left posterior canal. This is the right anterior canal. So do you get me? And we can do that same, what's it called? Same connection. Let's switch colors. Okay. We can do that same connection with the left anterior canal, which is this one, to the right posterior canal, which is this one. Sorry, this one. Yeah. Okay. So they're obviously also moving in parallel directions, or you can go that way if you want to. It doesn't really matter. You know, they're parallel. Okay. Okay. Now, we said that inside of the semicircular canals, we have semicircular ducts, and in the semicircular ducts, what do we have? Fluid is endolymph. Okay. Like, the way that things work are a little bit confusing in the beginning, but inshallah it will be easy to understand. Okay. Imagine I have this bottle, okay? And I want you to understand fluid dynamics first before we go into the physio. And I don't know if you can see it, and I slide it this way. The first movement that this fluid made was actually back. Why? Because the force of the whole bottle going forward pushed that fluid back. Oh no, what just happened? Oops. I have no idea what just happened. Can we stop the recording for a bit? Oh, never mind. Khas, never mind. Okay. So back to what I was explaining, technical difficulties. Okay. If I were to push this bottle forward, the first movement of the fluid inside the bottle would be going backwards. Why? Just imagine, you know, the fluid is shocked, you know, how could you move my container forward? I'm gonna move back. That's the way I remembered it, okay? But this concept, okay, of the container or whatever it is being moved forward and the fluid moving back is called inertia. Now you have to apply that same logic to the endolymph that's in the semicircular ducts, okay? So let's just say I have a duct, a semicircular duct. It's like, okay, this is the direction of the semicircular duct, okay? If I tilt it that way, the fluid, in what direction is it going to go? The fluid is going to go in the opposite direction, right? Like, the reason that I wanted you to understand this is that the way that we recognize rotational movements is very, very much based or reliant on the movement of the cupula in the ampulla, okay? So this black small arrow thing, that's the cupula, and this entire enlargement is the ampulla, which we said is at the base of each semicircular canal, okay? Play. In the ampulla of each one, we have the cupula. The cupula is a gelatinous dome, okay, that sits on top of the crista ampullaris. Crista ampullaris is basically the culmination or the collection of hair cells that we have in the semicircular canals. So we called that collection of hair cells in the utricle and the sacral a macula. We're going to call that collection of hair cells in the semicircular canals as the crista ampullaris. Where is it? In the cupula. And where's the cupula? In the ampulla. Okay? And where's the ampulla? At the base of the semicircular canal. I hope that like ends that, whatever it is. Okay. So the cupula will bend and move according to the movement of the endolymph. Okay. So this same mechanism of depolarization, tip links, and all that kind of stuff applies here. This time we don't have otoconia or otoliths. We don't have the calcium carbonate stones. It's just the same exact mechanism that we took previously in the cochlea. Okay. But this is when it's fully stable. We have no angular, no rotation, no nothing. Nothing is moving. طيب. Imagine طيب, and I move my head to the right side. What's going to happen is the fluid is going to start moving the opposite way, right? And that's going to push the cupula towards the right. Do you see how things are going? So I moved my head to the right. The endolymph, due to inertia, is going to start moving towards the left. That movement towards the left will push the cupula to the right. And that is how we recognize, hey, your head is moving towards the right side. Whoa, that's crazy. Okay, play. When, let's just say, okay, and I move my head to the right. Actually, let me close my eyes. I'm moving my head to the right. The reason that I know I'm moving my head to the right is because of this. Okay, this mechanism is happening. I can tell. But let's just say I stop my head. I stay like this for like 2 hours. Do you think the endolymph is still moving? Obviously, it's not still moving. Okay, we no longer have endolymph movement, and so the cupula is going to khalas maintain where it's at. We have no recognition, no nothing, and so yani in a very illogical world, if a human could forget that they have their head turned towards the right, you would no longer be able to recognize that your head is turned towards the right if you left it there for 2 hours. But because yani we all have brains and we can think and we're logical, if I leave it like that, I still know I'm turned to the right. Okay. But anyways, that was a little tangent. Same thing happens if I rotate to the left, the endolymph will move towards the right, pushing the cupula towards the left, recognizing my left rotation. I hope that was clear. Like, I literally already explained this. Nice. Okay. Now, we want to understand how in the world does the vestibular system correlate with things like my eyes, my hands? How do I maintain balance, right? If I'm in a roller coaster and I start moving up and down, how am I still able to stand once I'm done with the roller coaster? That is done with the vestibular connections, or the vestibular connections to the vestibular nuclei and all around the CNS. Let's understand that, okay? So first of all, the first thing that we need to appreciate is that we have primary vestibular neurons, okay? You know how we said that we have vestibular nerve and cochlear nerve, they eventually come together, vestibular cochlear. Like, let's just say we're talking about the vestibular nerve alone. These nerves are their primary location. The first place they're gonna go to is the vestibular nuclei, okay? So these are the vestibular nuclei. We have dorsal, we have lateral, medial, and all that kind of stuff, okay? So the primary vestibular neurons are going to connect the vestibular nuclei to the cerebellum. The reason that this is relevant is because the cerebellum is mainly for things like proprioception, being well coordinated while moving yourself. So in case, let's just say, you don't have proper vestibular, proper mechanisms of the vestibular apparatus. Let's just say it's not working properly. That will play a huge role with how you move your hands. Because, and for example, if I didn't have a properly working vestibular apparatus and my cerebellum was fine, maybe I'll move my hand in full accuracy, but I might fall over. Like it's a whole mechanism that goes on, right? But the primary vestibular neurons are going to connect to the vestibular nuclei, and that will go to the cerebellum. Okay, but that's not the only place it will go to. Keep that in mind. Okay, the vestibular nuclei or the nucleus also receive input from the cerebellum, the visual and the somatosensory systems. The reason for that is, first of all, from the cerebellum to maintain that coordination, that very conscious proprioception. Visual from the eyes, because I'm not going to talk about this. I don't want to spoil it, okay? And we're going to see why, okay? Vestibulo-ocular reflex, okay? We're going to go into it. But then the somatosensory systems, which means that, and for example, I'm able to control my tendons and my joints so I don't fall over and tip over and lose my balance because of that back-to-back communication that I have between the vestibular nucleus and my somatosensory systems, okay? Like, in the next coming, what the hell is going on? Okay. In the next coming 2 slides, it's just going to be connections to the vestibular nuclei. But I want you to understand that these do not go in any order. And just because they're 1, 2, 3, they're not in order. Because the connections in between the vestibular system and the apparatus and everything about it to the different locations is very complex and it's very intertwined and it's very back and forth. So you can't really go step by step because it will go up and down. Okay. But firstly, from the vestibular nerve, it will go to the vestibular nuclei. We have superior, lateral, medial, and inferior. Okay. Where are they located? In the dorsal medulla adjacent to the wall of the fourth ventricle. The location of that is here. Let me zoom in. Okay. Dorsal medulla meaning posterior side of the medulla, and medial to the fourth ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle. Medial to it, we have the vestibular nuclei. I just put this picture for you to understand in case any jumbled information from neuro and all that. Okay. It can also go to the brainstem. That will happen through the medial longitudinal fasciculus and the reticular formation. The reticular formation, the medial longitudinal fasciculus is actually, it's important, especially for cranial nerve number 3, if I'm not wrong. I think this needs to be confirmed. Just confirm it and make sure that I'm not wrong. But basically, the reason that it will go to the brainstem period in general is that it wants to influence cranial nerve number 3, number 4, and number 6. Why? This is where the vestibular ocular reflex comes into play. Cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor. We have its control on the rectus muscles in the eye. And also we have the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which is for, what is it? The parasympathetic pupil contraction and all that. Doesn't really matter. But also it goes to the trochlear nerve or cranial nerve number 4 because of its supply to the superior oblique. Yeah. And to cranial nerve number 6, it will abducens because of the lateral rectus, right? The reason that it goes to all of these places is because, for example, this is a very brief explanation of the vestibular ocular reflex. For example, if I'm rotating my head and I want to keep my eyes, you are here, I am looking at you, but I want to rotate my head for some reason. How do I know that I need to keep my eyes there? I know that because of the connections of the vestibular nuclei to the medial longitudinal fasciculus and the reticular formations, because they will influence my eye muscles to continue looking at you no matter where my head is turning. I can maintain my eye contact with you no matter what direction my head is going. Okay, and that is because of the influence towards cranial nerve number 3, 4, and 6. Like, so it coordinates conjugate movements of the eye with changes in the head positions. That is the vestibular ocular reflex. Okay, then it can go to the reticular formation, and that will send the afferent neurons towards a vomiting center for motion sickness. So, for example, if I don't really have anything, I don't have a problem with motion sickness. I have never felt it. But for people that are very sensitive, if you move their head a lot, they can get motion sickness and nauseous because of the reticular formation and its afferent neurons. And yeah, but then the thalamus and the conscious centers, the reason that it goes to the thalamus and conscious centers is because we're trying to relay the information that we are moving our head to the cortex, yada, yada, so it can go back down, and we're going to understand how it goes back down for it to be able to tell my body, hey, move this there, move this, that, move that there, so you can maintain your balance. And that is the proprioception stuff. Then for the cerebellum, specifically, it will go to the inferior cerebellar peduncle, okay? And that's for motor coordination. And then finally, it will go to the spinal cord through the vestibular spinal tract. And that is for the facilitatory to ipsilateral alpha and gamma motor neurons. Okay, pause. Facilitatory basically means excitatory. Okay, we're exciting. Ipsilateral means same side. Alpha and gamma motor neurons of the extensor muscles. Pause. What we mean by that, okay, is let's just say I'm standing. I'm not going to stand, obviously, but let's just say I'm standing, okay? I want to maintain my balance while I'm standing. Obviously, the first thing that I am not going to do is bend my knees. Obviously, I'm not going to bend my knees because if I bend my knees, I'm going to ruin my center of balance and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to trigger my extensor muscles, okay? Meaning that I'm going to contract my extensor muscles, such as I'm going to contract my extensor muscles to keep me standing upright. Yes? And that means that it's going to inhibit the flexor muscles. That's what this means. Okay. I put these pictures just for us to be able to visualize where the nuclei are. And this is what the nuclei look like. Bas wallah. Oh, and you can see cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 4. These are all the vestibular nuclei. And then this is the medial vestibular spinal tract, and that will eventually extend downwards through the spine itself. And yeah. Okay. So this is essentially everything that we talked about. I hope everything I said was clear. It's honestly, there's not much for you to understand. It's just kind of memorization, and it goes to, I can recap, yani. Vestibular nuclei, they're dorsal medulla, they're at the dorsal medulla adjacent to the fourth ventricle. Then to the brainstem, we said it goes to the medial longitudinal fasciculus and the reticular formation in order to influence cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6, and that is to control the vestibular ocular reflex. And then it also can go to the reticular formation, and which will send afferent neurons to the vomiting center for motion sickness, thalamus and conscious centers for proprioception, knowing exactly where you are, what position your body is in, all that kind of stuff. To the cerebellum, specifically the inferior cerebellar peduncle, that is for motor coordination. And then lastly, to the spinal cord, the vestibulospinal tract, we said that essentially it's going to send facilitatory or excitatory signals to the ipsilateral or same side alpha and gamma motor neurons of the extensor muscles and inhibits the flexor muscles because you want to remain standing upright at all times to maintain your balance. And yeah, so this is exactly what we said. We have a back and forth between the cerebellum and the vestibular nuclei. The reason for that is because there's always a back and forth between everything. The reason for that, though, is because of the whole coordination of movements, being able to stabilize yourself whenever you need to, all that kind of stuff. Vestibular apparatus will obviously send to the cerebellum as well. We already talked about this in the first slide, I think here. We said that the primary vestibular neurons are going to connect the vestibular nuclei to the cerebellum, and they will also send directly to the cerebellum. And the eyes will send more information to the vestibular nuclei to tell us, hey, where are you looking? Your head is rotated this way, look that way if you want to, Joint, tendon, muscle, and cutaneous receptors. This happens through the vestibular spinal tract, going up back to the higher centers, the cortex, and then coming back down to the vestibular nuclei, sending more information. Then from the vestibular nuclei, we said it will go through the vestibular spinal tract to control the movements of the body. Specifically, if we want to maintain our balance, then we're going to send excitatory signals to the alpha and gamma motor neurons of the extensor muscles, and then to the oculomotor center, that is for the vestibulo-ocular reflex. I'm gonna get a stroke one day while saying that. Now, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, okay? Like, these are the vestibular nuclei. This is for 6 and this is for 3, okay? Because right now we're only talking about medial rectus or lateral rectus. Once the superior oblique comes into play, which is the whole doll eye thing that is mentioned in your lecture, that is when we'll see it come up in the diagram, okay? Fine. Imagine, and I turn my head to the left, but I want to continue looking at you. So obviously, I'm going to use the lateral rectus of my right eye to push my eye laterally so I can continue looking at you on my lateral side on the right, but my left eye is looking medially. So the way that I'm going to control that is through the medial rectus, okay? Obviously, they're innervated by different cranial nerves. The lateral rectus, we know on both sides on the eyes, obviously. It's innervated by abducens or cranial nerve number 6, and the medial rectus and the inferior rectus and all that, or the inferior oblique, all of that, they're innervated by the oculomotor or cranial nerve number 3. So if I turn my head to the left, but I want to maintain my eye contact, I'm going to tell my lateral rectus of the right eye to contract and the medial rectus of my left eye to contract. Meaning that my right eye is looking at you laterally and my left eye is looking at you medially. Do you get it? Because this is medial, left is looking medially, but right is looking laterally. It's not looking towards this. Okay? So I hope that was clear. Yeah. Moving on. This is it looks like a lot. It looks like a headache actually. But honestly, it's pretty simple, inshallah. Basically, this is a semicircular canal. This is the cupula. Okay, sorry, it tweaked again. Okay, it's gonna do that, I think, hopefully not much more, okay? So here's the ampulla of the semicircular canal. Here's the cupula, okay? And let's just say I move my head to the right side, okay? My fluid is obviously gonna move, the endolymph in the semicircular ducts are gonna move to the left. That will cause the cupula to move to the right, recognizing that right rotation, okay? Fine. That signal will go to the vestibular nuclei. From the vestibular nuclei, that will go to, for example, the right abducens nucleus, okay? The right abducens nucleus, which we said is 6. And if we can see over here, it lateral rectus, right? So what it's gonna do is that, where is it? Okay, yeah. So it's gonna go to the left abducens. Why? Because the left abducens innervates my left lateral rectus. And if I turn my head to the right, I'm obviously contracting my left eye's lateral rectus, right? So the way I'm going to do that is by uh, exciting my left abducens nucleus and inhibiting my right. Because if I don't inhibit my right, my eyes are going to go sideways. Okay? But nice. So okay, so then okay, we're gonna have a continuation of these excitatory signals going upwards towards the right oculomotor nucleus. Okay, right, because now my medial rectus on my right eye is stimulated. It's contracting because it's looking at you towards my medial side, right? So in order to contract my medial rectus, we need the oculomotor or cranial nerve number 3. And to do that, we're going to continue with these excitatory signals. They're going to go to the right oculomotor nucleus and stimulate my right medial rectus muscle for the right eye. Okay. And then we have, they don't really mention the trochlear here, do they? The trochlear is this one, but I don't think they mention it anywhere on this. Anyways, the doll's eye movements, I'm pretty sure it's when, for example, if I move my head to bottom, if I move my head to the top, my eyes will remain looking at you, but my lids might close a little bit. And the reason that they continue to look at you, this is because the inferior and the superior oblique, which superior oblique innervated by trochlear. Same mechanism, literally, okay? But it's just not here. I don't know. It's just not here. But yeah, same mechanism. The doll's eye movement, that's the oculocephalic reflex, okay? Did I miss anything here? No, we are good. Okay. And obviously all the lines in red are the excitatory pathways. All the ones in black are the inhibitory. Hence why this is inhibitory. This is inhibitory. Yada yada. Okay. And we are done. Alhamdulillah. I hope this session was beneficial, and I hope I tried my best to make it easy, and I tried my best to make it fun. I hope that my stumbles along the way didn't really interrupt that flow of understanding. And inshallah, you guys like the ear anatomy and physio just as much as I do. And yeah. Thank you. And in case you have any questions or clarifications or any of that, here's my contact information.